can put it in this one. Okay.
Okay. All right, now it is a full 15 seconds, so YouTube should be running. All right, everybody, you are listening to Disclaimers by Ed Johnston. They wrote it, we quote it. It is currently May 19th, 2018. The lines are open, but we are not accepting...
Donna, you got quite the event today. It sounds like what's going on with you.
I'll try to shut this down here in a minute.
See, I tried doing a nice intro, and this is what happens. The star decides, oh, I haven't had my time yet. Yeah.
No, I didn't mute my board yet.
Okay, well, you might want to mute it because we're going to be doing the two intros that you wanted.
I just did.
Well, I'm still hearing you. Yeah, exactly. All right, first thing is going to be the exhibit 05051. Basically, they flat out state that taxes are voluntary. And then the next one is one that Ed just recently got to me. Basically, yeah, $9 trillion missing from the Federal Reserve, the IRS side. Interesting. So, here we go.
When the liberal group got a exempt status, and 3 that I just mentioned didn't for over 2 years. Mr. Nunes mentioned Ms. Lerner. Who was her boss in 2011 and 2012? Who did she report to?
I believe it would have been
Sarah Ingram, maybe?
part of that time another gentleman.
Okay, and that other gentleman has since submitted his resignation?
I believe so.
And what is Ms. Ingram doing today? What's her job title?
She works on on implementing the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, who promoted her to that position?
I would have moved her into that position.
Why would you promote somebody to that position who was in charge of the exempt organization division, which certainly has had some controversy over the last couple years, under an investigation?
Because she is a superb civil servant, sir.
So she had nothing to do with this?
I wouldn't imagine so.
Even
By the
though
way, I can't speak to individual cases. I can say generally, we provided horrible customer service here. I will admit that. We did. Horrible customer service.
You
Whether it was
targeted
politically
an individual.
motivated or not is a very different question.
You targeted an individual, an American who still doesn't know to this day why he was question number 26.
All right, time has expired. Mr. Becerra is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. And let me key off of something, Mr. Miller, you said. You said foolish mistakes were made. I think the President actually said it better. He said that the handling of those tax-exempt applications in that process at the IRS was outrageous and intolerable. No excuse. And as much as we know that the folks at IRS have a thankless job because they have to go and tell their fellow Americans that they may be audited or they have to do this work understaffed, we have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
And so you are right. It was a foolish mistake, but the President's even more correct that it was outrageous and intolerable. Now, let me also focus on something, Mr. George, you said. When you were asked, was there any finding or evidence of political motivation here, you said no.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And so what we find is a situation where inexcusable activity took place because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily. And if there's a place in public service where you have to have the highest level of conduct and standards, it's at the IRS. And so, Mr. Miller, I think it's unfortunate for those who are in positions of authority, but the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think that's exactly what we're saying. That should not diminish the good work that has been done by anyone within the IRS over the years. And so I hope you understand that you are here today talking to us because we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to clean up and clear out so we can go back to the business of making sure that people respect the fact that we have a voluntary system of paying our taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I want to talk a little about the culture of the organization. As looking at the note, your bio, 90,000 employees, $12 billion budget. You've been there 25 years.
Hello?
Okay, you heard it twice there talking about how there was a voluntary tax system. In an exhibit, in a hearing, a official hearing, and nobody disputed it. I mean, it becomes fact with that. Now, the next one, listen to the lady. She never actually answers about the trillions missing from the Federal Reserve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Inspector Coleman, you're the Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Have you done any investigations concerning the Federal Reserve's role in deciding not to save Lehman Brothers, which led to shockwaves that went through the entire financial system?
In that particular area, you know, I don't generally comment on specific investigations, but we do not currently have an investigation in that particular area.
All right. What about the $1 trillion plus in expansion of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet since last September? Have you conducted any investigations regarding that?
Right now we have a, we call it a review, and I don't know if the term investigation may have different connotations. So we're actually conducting a fairly high-level review of the various lending facilities collectively, which would include, you know, the TALF, a variety of the different programs that are in process. So we're looking at them at a fairly high level to identify risk.
Well, I understand that, but we're talking about events that started unfolding 8 months ago. Have you reached any conclusions about the Fed expanding its balance sheet by over $1 trillion since last September?
We have not yet reached any conclusions.
Do you know who received that money?
For the, we're in the process right now of doing our review, and
Right, but you're the Inspector General. My question to you specifically is, do you know who received that $1 trillion plus that the Fed extended and put on its balance sheet since last September? Do you know the identity of the recipients?
I do not know. We have not looked at that specific area at this particular point on those reviews.
What about Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September? Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments. We are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities specifically. Nevertheless, in our lending facilities project, for example, we are looking at the board's oversight over the program, and to the extent that extends out to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Well, I have a copy of the Inspector General Act here in front of me, and it says, among other things, that it's your responsibility to conduct and supervise audits and investigations relating to the programs and operations of your agency.
That's correct.
So I'm asking you if your agency has, in fact, according to Bloomberg, extended $9 trillion in credit, which, by the way, works out to $30,000 for every single man, woman, and child in this country. I'd like to know, if you're not responsible for investigating that, who is?
We have responsibility for the Federal Reserve's programs and operations, audits, to conduct audits and investigations in that area. In terms of who's responsible for investigating, would you mind repeating the question one more time?
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which, according to Bloomberg, now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
I'll have to look specifically at that Bloomberg article. I'm not I don't know if I have actually seen that particular one.
That's not the point. The question is, have you done any investigation or auditing of off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question.
Have you conducted any investigation or auditing of the losses that the Federal Reserve has experienced on its lending since last September?
We're still in the process of conducting that review. Until we actually, go out and gather the information, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific question.
So are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
I don't know if you're telling me that you're mentioning that there's losses. I'm just saying that we're not, until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way to that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
All right, that is it so far, and now it'll be Ed. It is May 19th, 2018. So Ed, why don't you take it away, and I'm still waiting for the guest speaker. I don't even know. Should I open up the board to see if he's here?
Okay.
No, I'm just asking, should I do that?
Well, yeah, he should be here, and let's find out.
All participants are unmuted.
So at least we got that. Larry, are you here? Well, that's interesting. I'm waiting for my computer to come back, see if we get any emails from him.
Well, there is one individual that has themselves muted, so if they don't remember how to unmute, it's *6.
Okay.
But
well, we have now. Dave is here, correct?
Mr. Buse, I believe so.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, gotcha. So, well, anyhow, I got some things. I'm going to turn the floor over to you here in a couple of minutes, Dave, to bring up your stuff until Larry gets here with Larry. Okay. But anyhow, I just want to let everybody know I do have the template done for the flags. I will be getting them out this afternoon, or tonight, to everybody that's responded back so we can put this together. There will be a structure on new.Oregon trackers for the flag issues only, for the administrative rules, the laws, and the circumstances of the military, tribunal, and maritime flags that they're using in the courts. It depends on what paperwork you read and which one you use to comprehend how they are utilizing the gold fringed flag, the military flag, in our courts and our city halls, and most of all our schools. So, that's the whole point. We want to get our country back to we the people. We do not believe in foreign nations in our country. Foreigners do not have rights in our country, especially their businesses and corporations. They have privileges. They are not entitled to actually own land in our country. They can rent it and lease it. And that's the one thing that, once we start getting back our country and start standing up to this, then changes will happen. Then we can make America great. As corporation president Donald Trump says. So, and he got it. He knows what's going on. He's working on these things. He's working on putting us back to the gold standard like Kennedy did when he was assassinated. So we've got to look at the possibilities and the positive of things that are coming. And we have to work on this and educate ourselves. Most of all, educate the children involved in these circumstances. Because once the children are educated, we do know what's going on and know circumstances of how it's applied. So it is one of those blissful things that we are learning, what we are doing, what we are succeeding on. And that is the major point on this, is the positivity of what we are doing. Now, I would like to explain what we are doing with the flag so people comprehend what the template is about. It's just a small little section asking the elected and public servants to certify or notify exactly what the flag means, their terminology of what it is in their office, why they fly that in their office. You know, just little things, you know, and it is so we can educate the children is basically the way I put it, because we want to be educated too. And so with that circumstances is as we do that, we can put these things as a positive structure on these things. And so that's the beauty of these things. You know, when we're doing this, we're getting the evidence of the state, so that way when you are going to these administrative procedures, you have their evidence, their words. They wrote it, we quote it, because we use their evidence and their wording, and that's how we are the most successful in these circumstances. So, you know, when we're being successful and we are starting to get these things happening, these information coming forward, we are being successful in these matters. And so that is the major point of being very successful in these matters, to comprehend what is really going on around us, especially with the system and our public servants. So that is the beauty of these things that we are working on. And so that is the one point we can't argue. So when we get the circumstances with the flag set up and completely done, and we get those on the website, and then people can start seeing what how it's worked, what it's produced, the circumstances of the procedures, and those type of things. You know, that's the beauty of this thing. You know, we start making these things work. We've got things that are happening, and for you and I, it's like everybody keeps going on about the children being kidnapped and all this stuff. We know the truth. We know what they're doing it for. We know the financial reasons. But it's our responsibility to stop it. You know, that's the bottom line. It's our responsibility. You know, and so anyhow, we'll bring that up. And so I don't know if Larry's here yet or not. I am finally signing back in because my computer went through one of those bleeps again, how that happens. So let me see where he's at, So I don't know. Larry's not here yet, I take it? Hello?
You put everybody...
I can hear you, Ed.
No, Larry.
Larry, is that you?
No, that was Mr. Buse, Master Buse.
Okay, well then we're gonna let. Where is he at? He just emailed me right now.
Yeah, I can't.
He's waiting for a call for us to call him.
So he needs to call in. Did you give him the info?
Yeah, I'm resending it to him right now.
All right. When he pops in, did he give you the number that he did? Why don't you message me the number?
Yeah.
So I know what I'm looking for. All right, I'm going back in the background.
Right. All right. Anyhow, while I'm catching up here, do me a favor. Why don't you go ahead for a few minutes, Dave, and explain some of your knowledge.
Okay, well, let me start with the flag issue, and you did bring up a good point there. The gold fringe flag that you see flying in all the public buildings, the governor's office, the president's office, it falls under military regulation. It's a martial law flag. It's a wartime flag. It falls under executive order by Dwight David Eisenhower of 10834. And you can read all about the flags of the United States and their descriptions in that executive order. Now, what happens when you go into a court of law and they're flying that flag? They should be flying a standard American flag with no gold fringe on it, because the gold fringe is the fourth color of the flag and is a desecration to the flag and it carries a 1-year prison term. But, oh, gee, the courts and the governors and all them don't want to put themselves in jail for flying a false flag. So, but the executive order itself definitely spells out that if you're flying that flag under color law fraud, which all these courts are doing in the United States, okay, this is called color of law fraud. They can actually be brought up on charges for doing that. So, just so everyone's aware that when you walk into a court of law and they're flying a gold fringe flag, they are committing a criminal act against you.
Only if you bring it to their attention that you're in the wrong jurisdiction.
And that also brings up the jurisdictional issue.
Mm-hmm. It's a big jurisdiction issue.
That's a very good thing you're doing, Ed, on the flag, because people need to wake up as to if you go outside the courthouse and you look at the flag they're flying above the courthouse, that's the standard American flag. It's when you get inside the courtroom that
or the building
they do the color of law fraud on you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll move forward here a little bit, Ed, or backward, I should say. In 2002, I had the privilege of going to Washington, D.C. for the redress of grievance that was filed by We the People against the Internal Revenue Service and the tax issues with Congress. Supposedly to the hearing on that redress of grievance. Congress ran us from one office to another, to another, to another, to another. Oh, gee, we can't find a vacant office. Well, considering they had about 4 months notice on this, plus 300 questions to answer to, relating to tax issues.
Yeah, excuse me a minute, Dave. The code, if I'm not mistaken, that I've been pumping out is 995745, right? Producer, where you at?
Hey, I mute the thing off the computer, so it takes me a bit to answer. So chill, relax.
I'm here. I don't know.
We do have a 717 area code. That's what I'm talking about. And it is the participant code is 995745.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm not sure about if he's on 717. I just sent it back to him. He just emailed me back and was informing me that the participation code that I gave him was not allowing him in.
Ed?
Yeah.
Larry Bigcraft.
There you go. Okay.
Good.
Well,
I didn't know. I thought you were going to send me a number. It didn't come, so I went over to your website and started looking around and saw that it's on YouTube. So we clicked on the YouTube link, and this has happened to me several times. Twice in the last 10 days. You type in, you call into these conference call numbers. You type in the participant codes. About 10 days ago, I typed in the participant code number, the access code number, and it denied me every time. And I just now was able to get through.
Yeah, well, you were panicking me there for a minute because it's like I've been using that participation code for a long time, and all of a sudden,
I don't know what it is. But at least we made it.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, so
say hi to Dave real quick, and then we're going to turn the floor.
What we're going to do is we're going to shut down everybody else. I'm going to keep Larry here and David up and going, and I guess I have to let you stay going, Ed. So, Larry, I'm the producer, so I'm the one in the background making sure everything goes as smooth as possible. So it'll be a short mute of everybody, and then I'll unmute those who is authorized.
All participants are muted.
So anyhow, what we'll do is we're going to open up the floor to Larry, let him have his free floor, and then we'll come back with questions after a bit. I know Dave's got a couple, and so we're going to do is go ahead, Larry. The floor is open to you. We've been posting around some of your court cases, so people know who. Well, a lot of people that's on the line with us know who you are too. So go ahead, and then
if you want me to give a little bit of a background.
Yeah.
I grew up here in Alabama. I've lived here all my life. I currently live in Huntsville, Alabama, where I've lived for most of my life. You know, I went to school in Birmingham, Alabama. I went to college and law school down there, Cumberland School of Law, Sanford University. Passed the bar. Started practicing law. You know, I'm now admitted into. I'm admitted in Alabama, a whole bunch of federal district courts. I don't even know which ones. I'd have to go look at the certificates. All the federal appellate courts except two, and the United States Supreme Court. So that's what I've done. The money issue was real important for me. You know, when I was in school, I had an economics degree. And one of the reasons why I studied economics in school is because when I was in high school, my dad had friends who were John Birchers, and they would fill me up with John Birch reading material. And so, you know, back when I was in high school, I reached this ultimate conclusion. We got a conspiracy going on in the world, and it's centered around the Federal Reserve. And that's one of the primary reasons I wanted to go into, you know, study economics when I was in school. And then I wanted to go to law school and learn about the law so that we could fight these systems that have been built around controlling the American people and societies across the world. But I ran into Tupper Saucy back in the late 70s and early 80s. He was the leader of the money issue movement back in those days. And I saw that most people, while they had a passing interest in the money issue, they were more interested in the tax issue. And the reason why the tax issue is so important because it's an economic issue. You know, it takes money away from people. And, you know, while you can be idealistic about your concerns about the monetary system, you know, when you get down to the real meat and nutty, important issues for the American people, you know, it's taking a lot of money away from them by means of the income tax. That's real important. So in 1984, I heard about Bill Benson running around the country checking out the ratification of the 16th Amendment. I established contact with him in the about the summer of 1984. And by the end of the 1984, you know, I myself had investigated several states, you know, traveled to Lexington, Kentucky, go to the Capitol to get a whole bunch of certified copies of what Kentucky had done. In 1985, I was the first lawyer to file a lawsuit, filed a motion to dismiss an indictment because of the non-ratification of the 16th Amendment. But, you know, I've been primarily interested during my lifetime in two issues, the money issue and the tax issue. And those are of concern to what I call the freedom movement, the patriot movement here in this country. You know, what I've done is I've been involved primarily in the defense of people charged with tax crimes. You know, we've raised the 16th Amendment issue to challenge indictments. The 16th Amendment issue didn't get anywhere because the court said, oh, well, that's not a judicial question. That is a political question. Take this complaint that you have about the ratification of the 16th Amendment, take that to Congress. But, you know, in reference to some interesting criminal cases, you know, back in 1990, the federal grand jury over in Memphis indicted, you know, 27 defendants. One was my client and good friend of mine, Franklin Sanders. He's a gold and silver dealer. You can look him up on the internet. He publishes a periodical called the Money Changer. You know, he buys and sells gold. Hey, if you're looking for gold and silver, call Franklin. But, you know, Franklin got indicted along with his wife. Half of the defendants were members of his church, including his pastor. And ultimately, we went to trial in January of 1991. There were 52 counts that were being tried by that jury against 17 defendants that stood trial. And on July 9th of 1991, the jury came back and read off 52 not guilty verdicts, and we had a party after that. Vern Holland, back in the early 90s, Vern operated Freeman Education Association. He got indicted because, like Franklin, he was operating a warehouse bank. We tried that case for 6 weeks in hot Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the jury came back and they had a hung jury. And after we'd spent 6 weeks in court with Vern, and the jury came back hung, we went over to Vern's office, and 6 of the jurors followed us over there, including the forelady of the jury, and joined Vern's organization. Tommy Cryer, a lot of people have heard of Tommy Cryer, Vernie Kuglin, she's the FedEx pilot from Memphis. There's a lot of interesting tax cases that have been involved in. I've got some victories under my belt, but I've also got some people who have been convicted. And the reason people have been convicted is, number one, it takes work to get in court and defend yourself, and a lot of people don't want to do that. But then there's also a lot of bad information that people rely upon, and, the jury's going to listen to, hey, this is the reason why I did this, and, the bad information certainly doesn't help. But, I think that's, in light of the time, Ed, when you called me and told me that you wanted me to come on the show, I picked out some topics that I think are real important for us to talk about.
Go ahead.
Now, sometime this afternoon, right after you called us, I thought that, I'd make a list of some of the things that we need to talk about that are concerned to patriotic Americans that they need to know something more about. And so I sent to you the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. Now, are you in front of your computer?
Yes, I am. I'll pull it up. I know exactly what you're talking about. I am very familiar with that.
Okay. Now, here's what I want people to, this is what I want to discuss. Let me see where I've got to pull this up. Oh, that's in my sent box. Okay.
And, I would like to add something, Larry, to that one, too. Don't forget that Trading with the Enemy Act does apply to elected and public servants.
Well,
1938 Foreign Agent Registration Act.
Well, let's take a look at the actual act itself. And here's what, Ed, this is a real problem I've suffered from for years. And, this is the reason why back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I got my hands on some JPEG images of the entire United States statutes at large. Mm-hmm. Now, I personally converted all of those JPEGs to PDF images, and then I strung together all the volumes of the United States statutes at large into one file, for each volume, and then I converted it to text so that you could engage in word searches of the PDF images. Now, I'd like to tell our listeners that, I have a website that is full of a lot of law. And
Give your website and information out. Go for it.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. My website, my legal website, is on my internet service provider's website, highway.net. So the way you'll find my Dixieland Law Journal is to simply use a search engine. Don't use Google. Type in Beecraft Briefs or Dixieland Law Journal in an internet search engine, and that will carry you over to the front page of my website that I myself built. It's nothing fancy. It's just basically words and some colors and stuff like that. It's very simple. But, there's not but about 7 or 8 links to other pages on the front page. And I've got one file, one page called Taxation, and you can go over to the Taxation page, and I've got a wealth of material on Taxation page. You can read all of the old tax acts, all of the old tax regulations. They're there. All you have to do is download them. Nobody ever did that before. But if you get over to the page that's got the statutes at large, and that page is the link on the front page is constitutional and other legal materials, click on that page, and that'll carry you over to another page where I've got a lot of legal information, including the page you can click on that will have all of the United States statutes at large right there. You can download them. And what I encourage people to do is to download the files of the statutes at large. One volume is in one file. So volume 1 of statutes at large you can download, it's one file. Volume 2 of statutes at large you can download, it's one file. And they're all word searchable. And I did this back in 2002 before anything was available. Only here within the last 3 and 4 years has the federal government decided to make this legal material available. And here's the problem, Ed, if you go back into the 90s and the 80s, 70s, and 60s, patriotic Americans, they didn't have access. Most lawyers didn't have access to, like we have now, legal material. I can remember, when I was in law school, you had to go to the law library to look at the statutes at large. And the statutes at large are not in a lot of places. And what you find in most places is United States Code, but most places didn't even have access to that. And you might have in a local community, the library might have the U.S. Code, but they certainly wouldn't have the United States Statutes at large. The United States Statutes at large is the foundation for the U.S. Code. Mm-hmm. So, there was a reason why I wanted to make the United States Statutes at large word searchable, and we'll get into a little bit of that maybe during the course of this program. But here, now that we have, and especially since the government is coming online and putting, their PDF images of the statutes at large, some of them are kind of large. They have scanning machines that are high resolution, which creates these big files, and they're probably a lot more accurate in reference to word searches. But pulling those giant files up can be a labor. But more and more legal material is coming online, and this is solving a problem that for the last 50 years, patriotic Americans didn't have access to legal materials at their fingertips. Now, having said all that this stuff is available free on the internet. Let's get around to. I want to offer this explanation about why the Trading with the Enemy Act was enacted by the Congress of the United States, and why similar acts are in effect in countries all across the world. Ed, let's suppose that we got into a war today with Mexico. Mm-hmm. Okay. Hey, there are Mexican companies that have United States branches. Like a trucking company. It might have trucks in the United States and in Canada and Nicaragua and let's say you got a large Mexican trucking firm. And war breaks out between the United States and Mexico. Well, what happens? Well, during wartime, a country will declare that the property of the enemy in his jurisdiction is going to be seized. And that's been going on hundreds of years. In Europe, if you go back and take a look at the European wars, when they engaged in war, hey, look, if Hungary and Yugoslavia were battling, or, Poland and Germany were battling against each other, they were engaged in war, the assets of the enemy in your jurisdiction would be seized and denied use of by the enemy. That just makes all the sense in the world, and that is the purpose of a Trading with the Enemy Act. However, like going back to what we said a minute ago, suppose the United States and Mexico got involved in a war, and we declared war on Mexico. Well, let's suppose you have a Mexican trucking company that's operating in the United States at the time of the outbreak of the war. Well, various things could be done. You could completely seize the business and sell off its assets. However, chances are that Mexican trucking company is engaged in business here in the United States, and it's engaged in commerce. Well, you wouldn't necessarily seize the business. You would take control of the business. And chances are you'd use those Mexican trucks, obviously being driven. They could be driven by Mexicans, but chances are they'd probably be driven by Americans. You could turn the enemy's assets into assets you could use against him. So that is the purpose of a Trading with the Enemy Act. And, and this is a little example of the Mexican trucking company that's doing business here in the United States. It would be the alien property custodian would take over control of that Mexican trucking company. And chances are that Mexican trucking company, if its assets weren't sold, would be put to use in the war effort against Mexico. So that's the purpose of a Trading with the Enemy Act. Now let's get around to, and let's specifically address, a lot of rumors that have floated through the freedom movement, and these rumors have circulated because people didn't have access to and didn't actually look at the laws that they're talking about. So now, I want you to tell our listeners that you have pulled up what I emailed to you, which is this file called, I labeled it 1917 TWE, Trading with the Enemy, the 40 Stat 411. Have you got that on the screen?
You're dealing with Title 50?
No. That's the first one I sent to you was I sent to you two files.
Okay.
And the first one has a file attached. The name of the file is 1917 TWE, standing for Trading with the Enemy, 40 Stat 411.
Okay, hang on, man. Let me go. Let me go back over here because I was putting you in another file, so I was just starting a file on you on this stuff.
Okay.
So I got to backtrack because I haven't gone. I haven't set up all that yet, but I'm still in the process.
Okay.
So let me get over here and pull it up. Wait a minute. Let me pull up. Okay, 1917 TWE.
Right. You got that? You got it open?
I'm opening it right now.
All right. Now let's deal with, and this is going to actually, looking at the actual documents, can tell whether a rumor or some hearsay is accurate or not. Now let's take a look at the, I've explained the purpose, and there's a lot of, you can get out, Google Books has put a lot of historical information online. And when I discovered it, I use it to pull up, you just type in a subject, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes up on anything. And I've downloaded and gotten books I never even heard about before. And they're all available on Google Books. And and you can look for Trading with the Enemy books, and you can get them off of Google Books. You download them. And there's a lot of historical books regarding Trading with the Enemy Act that you can download from Google Books to provide a historical context. But for our present purposes, what we're doing is we're going to actually look at the law itself. Okay, so taking a look at Volume 40 of the Statutes at Large, which I'm hoping you got that one pulled up, page 4.
Yeah, I've got it open. I'm just trying to figure out where you're at.
Okay, now, hey, I highlighted it. It's highlighted.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm going through the highlight. I see the enemy, the other citizens.
Yeah.
And let me clarify where it says other citizens. It's the low C citizens dealing with the 14th Amendment. Go ahead.
Well, but, let's just deal with what the words in the Act itself says.
Right.
So if you're going to enact a law Trading with the Enemy, it'd be real important for you to define the enemy. And so Section 2 of the Trading with the Enemy Act says that the word enemy, as used herein, shall be deemed to mean for the purposes of such trading and of this act. Now, A, you can read A, any individual, partnership, or other body of individuals of any nationality. Well, this paren A is going to describe, people inside a country that you're at war with. That's what A is. B, well, it's the government of any nation which the United States is at war, or any political or municipal subdivision thereof, or any officer, official, agency, or agent or agency thereof. Now, C, let's look at C. and this is in the Trading with the Enemy Act, after they've described the enemy as the people inside an enemy country, and then also the government of that enemy country, now C says, such other individuals or body or class of individuals as may be natives, citizens, or subjects of any nation with which the United States is at war. Boom, here's a big exclusion. Other than citizens of the United States, wherever resident or wherever doing business. So now you can see in the language of the Trading with the Enemy Act that citizens are expressly excluded. Now, not only are we dealing with an enemy in the Trading with the Enemy Act, we're also dealing with an ally of an enemy. Okay? Now, this Section 2 goes on to define the ally of an enemy. And, it's basically the same thing as enemy itself, but, an ally is not the exact country that you're at war with, but, a friendly nation or a friendly country that is trading with your enemy. That's an ally of an enemy. But when you get down here to subsection C in this definition of ally of an enemy, it says this: such other individuals or body or class of individuals as may be natives, citizens, or subjects of any nation which is an ally of a nation with which the United States is at war, other than citizens of the United States, wherever resident or wherever doing business. So you can plainly see here in, it makes all the sense in the world. The Trading with the Enemy Act, citizens are not presumed to be at war with the United States. Citizens are going to be the people at home. They're not going to be considered the enemy. And Congress did not, in the Trading with the Enemy Act, say that citizens were the enemy because they were expressly excluded from the definitions of enemy and ally of an enemy. Now, let's move forward. Let's go down to Section 5. You have the Act itself, and you can go through it and see where I have highlighted in yellow, certain things of interest. You can go ahead and post what I have here on your website. But you can go through this whole act, and it is applicable to who is the subject of the Trading with the Enemy Act. It's real easy to see who is the subject of the Trading with the Enemy Act. It's the enemy or an ally of an enemy. And the enemy has been defined in this act, and it excludes citizens. And ally of the enemy is defined in this law, and it excludes citizens. Now let's go down and let's deal with Section 5, which is what a lot of people, don't have access to and don't have a real good explanation of. Section 5 of the Trading with the Enemy Act, this is what was amended back in, this is the section that was amended to cover FDR's ass as a result of his closure of the banks back in March of 33. But let's take a look at what Section 5 looked like when it was first written and made law in 1917. Section 5. This deals with what the president can do regarding the Trading with the Enemy Act. And, of course, the president is the executive, and it's his executive officers that were administering the Trading with the Enemy Act. And so he's, the alien property custodian worked for the President of the United States. So the President is the enforcement officer for the Trading with the Enemy Act. And so Section 5 is really defining what the President can do. And here in Section 5 it says that the President, if he shall find it compatible with the safety of the United States and with the successful prosecution of the war, may by proclamation suspend the provisions of this act so far as they apply to an ally of an enemy. But let's move down to B. It's halfway down that page in that PDF image. Can you move down to B?
Yeah, I'm sending that to Dave right now.
Okay. That the president may investigate, regulate, or prohibit under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe by means of licenses or otherwise. Any transactions in foreign exchange, export or earmarkings of gold and silver coin or bullion and currency, transfers of credit in any form. Now, this is real important. Other than credits relating to transactions to be executed wholly within the United States. Now, who can they do these activities, that the president is authorized to do? Who does he do them against? Well, you can see I've got ally, enemy ally highlighted there. And when you sit down and you take a look at B, it's one or more foreign countries but if you've got some transactions between aliens, say here in the United States, and offshore, hey, that's something that the president can do something about. So, that's what it's a Section 5 that got amended in 1933. Now, I didn't mail it to you, and to move along in this little presentation of Trading with the Enemy Act, and you can post it, please post that file that I sent to you. A lot of people need to take a look at it.
No, we're going to put a page up just for you.
Okay, all right, good enough. Now, let me look at it here on my hard drive. I don't know. Let me find. Here it is. I will email to you the amendments. And now here's what happened. As a student of the money issue, I have reached the conclusion that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what happened during what caused the Great Depression. And maybe if we have enough time tonight, I can relate this to you. But the financial power here in this country, has grown over the years. And if you go over to my website and get on the money issue pages, you can download some, historical works from during the period of Andrew Jackson. And my office is located on Andrew Jackson Way here in Huntsville, Alabama. But, there's Gouge. There's this Gouge guy, William Gouge, that wrote a real good book at the beginning of the Andy Jackson administration, talking, it was this history of the financial power in this country. He shows how the banks grew, and, we didn't have, I think there was one bank in this country at the time of the Revolution. In 1781, you might have had the Bank of North America in Philadelphia. But, it's when the federal government got created, and you have Andrew Jackson in there, you have these people, these people that are interested in, let's call it for what it is. They have an interest in fractional reserve banking. Mm-hmm. And fractional reserve banking is where you can have deposits, but you can have those deposits support multiple issues of outstanding notes. And that's what's so good about fractional reserve banking. You can circulate in the community more bank notes than you have money to redeem those notes. Mm-hmm. Why? Because people, trust you to, oh yeah, you've got the money to redeem my note. No, he doesn't. But the fractional reserve banking really began to grow, and you can see it when you read William Gouge's book that is available over on my website on the money and banking page of my website. I'm a hard money man. I believe in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution. The federal government doesn't have power to compel the states to make anything other than gold, silver, coin, tin, or paper debts. But I digress. That financial power, grew over time until ultimately, during the Civil War, the financial power secured the enactment of the National Banking Act of 1863. That enabled them to gain more power, wealth, and political influence, so that by 1909 they create the 1909 Great Recession, and that prompted the creation of the Federal Reserve Act. And, of course, the Federal Reserve Act just happened to be fortuitously in place, and those banks were in operation by the time we decided to get into World War I. But,
I thought we were drug into World War I.
Well, there was a lot of planning that went into World War I. Do you think that the killing of some unknown duke really was the cause of World War I?
No, I thought most people were happy when that happened.
Yeah, well, certain people, the banking industry and the war implements industry were certainly interested in having a World War I, but there's more factors than that. But nonetheless, World War I happened, and it was successfully fought by the United States because we had the Federal Reserve banks in place. Mm-hmm. Now, after the war was over with, they pulled their first contraction of the currency. And, this contraction of the currency is also on my website. There's in 1923, there was a financial periodical published, the minutes of the meeting of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank back in, I think, May 1920. And that transcript of that meeting was snuggled out, and it got published in the Congressional Record. And if you want to read what this financial company published in its magazine about the smuggled out notes of a meeting of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve System, you can read it. And hey, what they decided to contract the currency. Hey, that's what fractional reserve banking is about. You expand the currency, and then you contract the currency. And when you contract the currency, people can't pay, and so that enables you to foreclose on real assets. And so that's to me, that's exactly what happened with the Great Depression. You can plainly see from the notes of the meeting of the Federal Reserve Bank, they deliberately pulled off the first contraction of credit. So, I think there's a very good argument for saying, hey, that's what they did to create the Great Depression. But you got to also remember, fiat money has always been at war with specie. They don't like gold and silver coin. There is a war that has always been waged between paper and gold and silver. So what prompted these actions in the early 1930s, in the 33 and 34 period, I've got it over a brief on my website. If you read a brief on my website, that outlines, it's kind of long, but it links to all of the important cases dealing with gold and, the monetary provisions of the United States Constitution. Read that brief. But I mentioned in that brief, and I think a link to a copy of this page out of the Congressional Record, where, in June of, I think it's June 3rd or June 4th of 1933, a page in the Congressional Record where they note that here the Federal Reserve banks come along and expand the currency, and they create the roaring 20s, and then they contract the credit. Well, they still have the ability to expand credit. They can now buy different things. So after they attack the private business, the private sector of the American economy, they shift their credit power over to government debt. And so all of the gold bonds of the United States that were to mature through the rest of 1934 and into 1935, the Federal Reserve banks bought up all of those gold bonds. And the debate in Congress at the time that they're talking about these sweeping changes in the monetary system here in this country, they talk about, hey, look, man, if we got to do something, we can't pay the Federal Reserve banks have bought up all of the gold bonds that we owe. And they're talking about that in Congress. And so there's one or more pages, that, you can pull up a PDF image, I hope. At least I cite the congressional record pages. And the congressional record is now posted on the internet. You can find it. But, that's what the congressional record says. And that's part of the motivation of Congress to make these monetary changes as a result of the actions of, what happened back in 33 when FDR came into power. But now let's get back around to, what we're talking about, the Trading with the Enemy Act.
Right.
When FDR came into office, he closed the bank. That's history. He just issued a proclamation, and boom, the banks did it. Hey, he didn't need a blue. This had to be orchestrated. He didn't have to send any marshals out and no army out to close down the banks because they refused. Hey, the banks, they obeyed him. That means, hey, they were in league with him. They wanted the banks closed. And, that was, and of course, if you get into Gene Schroeder's work, about during this period, he's got some real good historical documents that relate to those events of those days. But, here FDR comes along and he has no statutory authority to make this proclamation. And he issues it nonetheless, and the banks close, with no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then Congress was not in session. They had to come back into session. And, this is when I'm going to email this to you.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say anything in the body of it. I'm just going to say, it's being emailed to you. But the only thing they did to justify what FDR did is they just amended Section 5 of the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. And whereas the Trading with the Enemy Act talked about the Trading with the Enemy Act being in effect and authorizing the president to do certain things during period of war, what they did, and, I don't know whether you've gotten it by now.
I'm going to my email right now because I'm being bombarded with some other people right now sending me stuff. I'm going back and forth right now, so let me get back over there, and I'll inform you when I'm there. Hang on just a second.
Now, what they did is they amended, remember a minute ago we were looking at Section 5 of the Act of 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act. Now, on this, this is Volume 48 of the Statutes at Large, page 1. This is when Congress came back into session. I don't know whether this was a new Congress or
it's partly new and old Congress.
Yeah, this is the first session, so this is a completely new Congress.
Right.
This is the Congress that had been voted into office in 1932. So this new Congress comes to Washington, D.C., and on March the 9th, they come along and they amend. If you take a look at this act, the rest of it relates to, Federal Reserve Bank and everything else. But what they do here in section, they amend Section 5 of the Trading with the Enemy Act, and it says during time of war or during other period of national emergency declared by the president. So what they did is they changed the language in Section 5B of the Trading with the Enemy Act to now authorize the president to do these things not only during war, but during a period of national emergency.
Right, and let me clarify, this is public law of the 73rd Congress, and when the state declares an emergency or a national emergency, that's where they put the purpose of saying we don't have to go by the Congress or the Constitution because we're an emergency to save you.
Well,
go ahead.
I maintain a slightly different position. You know, there's two ways of looking at the acts of government.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, actually, are elected and public servant because we are the government.
Yeah, right. But you can either look at it, you know, and a lot of people want to make these arguments that, well, these guys have been freed from the restraints of the Constitution. Well, I'm not in that camp.
Right.
I maintain that at all times the Constitution's in effect, and it binds those guys because we need that argument in order to rein them in. And if you accept that the Constitution no longer applies, then hey, you may as well be a slave. You know, you've acceded to their wishes. You give up your only tool when you make an argument like that.
Well, you're saying that you're willing to kneel and bow your head and take the responsibility and the actions or whatever they're going to do with that to you without your knowledge.
Yeah. But here's the point I want to make about trading with the enemy. You know, you've seen the original Trading with the Enemy Act. Now you're looking at it on the screen, or maybe you haven't got it by now. But
oh yeah, no, I've got it. We've actually had this conversation on the talk show and read this stuff literally on the talk show in the past.
Okay, but see now what they did. You know, all they did in 1933 to justify after the fact what FDR did. Now they say, we'll give him these powers during a period of national emergency. Whoa, you know what in the world is a national emergency? Undefined. You know, this is just smoke and mirrors stuff. But you know, it was sufficient for justification. Now let's take a look at here the national emergency is declared to clean up the problem with the unfounded declaration of the president to close all the banks, and the banks were opened after that. But then the war on gold and silver began. That happened with the FDR. That happened during FDR's administration. Now, one of the things, you know, there were seizures of gold. You know, there were laws passed to seize gold. Now, I maintain, you know, I have a little bit different position from a lot of people. You know, I take a look at the Trading with the Enemy Act, and, you know, there are certain terms in the Trading with the Enemy Act that really make it of limited application. There's two areas that I think that the Trading with the Enemy Act really applies. And it would not, and those two areas would be, it's either jurisdictional, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 jurisdiction, within the jurisdiction of the United States. That's what the definition of the United States is within the Trading with the Enemy Act. Then and now, within the jurisdiction of the United States. And within the jurisdiction of the United States is not the same place as within the United States. But then, within areas subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is also not within the United States. Subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is in the insur possessions. And if you want to see that, if you want proof of that, look at the 18th Amendment prohibiting booze. You know, the 18th Amendment uses the phrase subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in its almost universal use. And the 18th Amendment reads, you know, there shall be no transactions in booze within the United States or areas or territories subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Right.
Subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that legal phrase does not mean within the United States. And typically, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is a direct reference to the insur possessions. And waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States means primarily the waters around the insur possessions. But I digress. Let's kind of move forward. You know, this war on gold was carried out in the mid-30s. Later on, there was a war on silver, one, without the authority of law. But, you know, let's go back to the war on gold. You know, there was a series of cases that went up to the Supreme Court about 1935 I call it a trilogy, and that's the Norman, Nortz, and Perry. And if you read my brief on, the monetary powers and disabilities on the United States Constitution posted on my website, there are links to these cases. But if you sit down and you take a look at the Trading with the Enemy Act as it was in effect in 33 and 34 when all these gold seizures were happening, the issues that were not raised were how in the world the Trading with the Enemy Act, here's what happened with that the amendment to Section 5. In 1926, they created the United States Code. Title 12 was devoted to banks and banking. And when the 1933 Act came out, this amendment to Section 5, they took that amendment to Section 5, and they didn't stick it over into, when they put it in the United States Code, they didn't stick it in the Trading with the Enemy Act expressly. They pulled that section out and stuck it over and created 12 United States Code Section 9, or what used to be in the recent past, Section 95A. So it caused a lot of people to look at it standing on its own, out of context. And so these out-of-context issues were not raised in these three cases that went to the United States Supreme Court, Norman, Nortz, and Perry. Now, you don't know who Norman, Nortz, and Perry are. They don't talk about their citizenship status. Let's presume them to be probably enemy aliens or allies of the enemy. Even at that time, citizens were excluded from the definition of both enemy and ally of an enemy. So how in the world, and this is what troubles me even today, I have friends that talk about, oh, well, man, maybe Uncle Sam can do all this seizure. Oh, we got to fear all this. And my position is that type of talk is crazy, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But, these issues of the proper application of the Trading with the Enemy Act and its context did not come up in this trilogy of cases dealing with the gold seizures in 1933. Now let's quickly move forward. Ed, have you got the current version of Trading with the Enemy Act on the screen?
The other one, no. Let me
go and pull it up.
Yeah, I'll get to that here in just a second because I got the one, and then where's the other one?
The act itself, the name of it, the file I sent. I just download this stuff and I create my own file names. But this particular file is called TWE Extracts.
Yeah, 40 stat 411.
No. That's the wrong one.
Oh, you're talking about what? You're not talking about the Title 50, are you?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I do have that up, but tell me that you're talking Title 50 or the other one. So.
Yeah, I'm talking Title 50.
All right, I'm on page 6, right?
Yeah, okay. We got it up. The name of that file is called TWE Extracts. You can change it whatever you want, but that's the way I sent it to you.
Yeah, I already changed it to Title 50 and the War of National Defense that I could put out.
All right, now, the Trading with the Enemy Act is codified in the United States Code in one place, and that's in Title 50, the appendix. And the Trading with the Enemy Act is the first set of laws in that appendix of Title 50. So let's take a look at it. And this is, and in all the, let's see how many sections there are. 44 sections. But Section 1, remember, the Trading with the Enemy Act as the way it appeared in 1917, had in Section 2 the definition of the word enemy and also the definition of the word ally of an enemy. Now remember, in both the definition of enemy back in 1917, citizens were excluded. That hasn't changed. Even today, in this file you have on the screen, Title 50 Appendix Section 2, it has the definition of enemy. And you can see down in paren C, there's an exclusion there. It says, other than citizens of the United States, wherever resident or wherever doing business. Now, remember Section 2 of the Trading with the Enemy Act also defined ally of enemy. And paren C, under this definition, also excludes citizens, as it says, other than citizens of the United States, wherever resident or wherever doing business. So this is what Franklin Sanders, he believes, my client believes, oh, Uncle Sam, I'm in the gold and silver business. Oh, gee, Uncle Sam can seize, my gold and silver. And I say, crap, or bullshit. The law doesn't authorize it. The law expressly excludes citizens from being either defined as an enemy or ally of enemy. And then when you sit down and you read the entirety of the Trading with the Enemy Act, even now, it applies only to enemies and allies of enemies. So how did things change? The reason is people, even back in, or maybe these were test cases, and the real important issues were never raised. But, you can't say that these three cases back in, 1935, Norman, Nortz, and Perry, those cases involved seizure of gold and the legal issues, the constitutional issues that arose in those cases. And the reach and scope of the Trading with the Enemy Act wasn't even discussed. And the reason why is everybody didn't put this amendment to the Trading with the Enemy Act in context. They were just looking at what the Congress said in 1933, in March of 1933. Oh, the president can do all these things. Well, that was an amendment to an act. Well, you better go take a look and understand the whole act. And even at the time in 1933 when these seizures were carried out, that could only be done in reference to an enemy or an ally of an enemy, because citizens were excluded from the definition of either ally or of an enemy or even the enemy. So you have that legitimate question. Now, remember back in 1933, they expanded the times during which the president could do these things. It started out during the war. Oh, well, we got to cover FDR's butt. He didn't have any statutory authority to close the banks. And so they came along and added national emergency.
Well, I'd like to interrupt you for a quick second. I want to bring something to your attention if you're not familiar with. You remember Director Eager Jr.?
Roscoe Egger?
Yep.
Well,
I emailed you the letter he sent out about you and Duncan on April 4th, 1985.
Hey, well, let's get around. Hey, can we? I've got a direct response to that, and I want to explain to people. Bill Benson and I have been plagued with that since 1985.
Oh, I know that. They're freaked out because what you brought forward, and I got the congressional record on the other point where they proved in congressional record that it was never ratified.
Well, hey, let's get into that.
No, go for it. I just wanted to bring that up for people so they comprehend how far it goes back and what you've been involved with.
Okay, so even today, the reason why there's this, I call it a false belief, a completely false, unfounded legal belief. And it's caused by probably the government wants, and the banking industry wants you to believe this. Oh, we have all these mighty powers. We can take your gold and silver away from you. No, they can't. Mm-hmm. And that's because people don't actually sit down and look at the law. And that's without even, talking about, well, where can this law be applied? I've got other arguments in that respect, but we're not going to cover them here. But that's one of the fallacies that, a lot of people in America, both in the patriot movement, the freedom movement, and outside of it, and particularly in, some of these businesses that have something to do with finances. They're associated with the financial industry. They're uneducated about the reach and scope and application of the Trading with the Enemy Act, which today, when they came along and said in 1933 that the president can declare it during periods of national emergency, that has been amended back in 1973. The church, remember the Church Committee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Frank Church, he was investigating a whole lot of things, which included these national emergencies. And, back in 33, they were just looking into how many national emergencies the president had declared. And so they came out with a new law to regulate the declarations of national emergency, which incidentally is the next set of laws after you get out of in Title 50, the appendix, after the Trading with the Enemy Act. And so they've shut down most of the national emergencies that presidents have declared. And, now if there's going to be a declaration of national emergency, the president's got to have some statutory authority to do it. But you will find that these national emergencies really only apply outside this country. Ed, do you remember back in December, there was a lot, and this may have some relationship, maybe Q got it started or not. But, Trump came along and issued an executive order. Back, I think it's December 21st, 2017.
Oh, yeah. I know which one you're talking about.
Boy, a lot of people, oh, wow, man, this is an attack upon the deep state. They're going to seize all their assets and blah, blah, blah. All the wild stories. Kind of like the wild stories were about, there's 25,000 indictments against people inside the deep state. I don't know whether we're going to cover that or not. But, if you take a look at that executive order, if you listen to just the news and the rumors that float around, quite often most of them are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, this talk about, about that executive order, why don't people go look at it? Now, that executive order was
Well, let's bring it up to them so they comprehend. The executive order, which I'm pulling up right now because I already have it programmed in my machine, basically says if you are involved in human trafficking, they could take your personal assets and put you in prison. Executive order blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corporation. December 21st, 2017.
All right. Now, if you take a look at the preamble to that executive order, there are several authorities cited there, one of which was that last part about human trafficking was an extension of the power of the president to seize in reference to people engaged in trafficking. But before that, it was in relationship to other things beyond human trafficking. There's espionage and financial crimes that have been committed. So it's those matters in addition to human trafficking. The president's power in reference to those executive orders in reference to human trafficking happened only recently, and most of it, but before that time, it was in reference to things like George Soros would do. But then the declaration only, the executive order only applies to specific people that have got to be named. And if you look at that executive order, there's an appendix to it. And you go over to that appendix, and the names of the parties to whom it applies is listed there. There are 13 guys. A lot of them are Arabs. I think one of them's a Jewish guy, but incidentally, they're all outside the United States. So, the point I want to make about the Trading with the Enemy Act, there's a lot of rumors that float around, and I've learned over time that if you hear it as a rumor, there's a good chance that it's incorrect. And if you want to believe a rumor, you better check out its foundation. And the Trading with the Enemy Act, the current arguments and beliefs about it, whether you're in the freedom movement or not, they're completely erroneous. And they sit there and they concede power of the federal government that simply is not there. So I wanted to address that on the front end, because I looked at your website and these are kind of some of the things that you discussed, and I wanted to bring it up.
Yep.
To me it's real important for people to actually look at the law, and that's what I encourage people to do. You and I got in contact with because I'm carrying out a battle against old Judge Anna right now. I call her fake Judge Anna.
Well, I emailed out to about a couple hundred people that have been involved with me and her, and I proved 3 years ago she wasn't a judge. Dave could testify to that here in a little bit. But the thing is that got to me about her is I've been asking her to prove that she's a judge. I want to see certification. Because when I called the state of Alaska, the clerk goes to me, who?
Well, she wanted people to think that at the beginning. When she first started using it, she wanted, hey, man, I've issued these orders. Remember those orders?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, man, people went wild. Wow, there's a judge in Alaska, and look at these orders she's issued. Oh, she wants to be president of the United States, I guess, or she wants to be governor. But here's one of the things I've learned about her. And I've got over on my website, I've got a very long treatment. She makes these statements, and quite often they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I tear them apart. It's kind of like, here recently, I got into a dispute with her. She sent me something, and, it dealt with this case of Sherwood Rodriguez against, he sued somebody. It went up on appeal to the United States. And for years, the people in the Patriot movement have cited the Rodriguez case from the Ninth Circuit. I think it's a 1977 case. It says, well, all codes, don't apply to citizens or something like that. Well, there's nothing in that case that says anything like that. And quite often, Judge Anna will, cite some of
alleged Judge Anna, because we don't know if she's true or not. So let's not give her the credibility until she can prove it.
Yeah, well, I call her fake Judge Anna.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But, I don't know whether I'm offending somebody by saying fake Judge Anna during the course of the program or not. But, that's...
Well, that even goes back to Bruce Dissat and everybody else with the crazy stuff that all transpired. And so, and it's not going after these people, but, you got to remember, if you're claiming a title of nobility, it's going to come back either you got to prove it or it's going to bite you in the butt. So go ahead.
But one of the things I found out about her, I sit down and I analyze, and I've got this file over on my website. She posted a bunch of stuff on Arnie Rosner's website, Scan Retina. And so I just take the claims that she makes there and, bold them in red, and then I tell the truth about it. It's kind of like, there were people running around talking about, Congress died in 1861. No. All that happened in 1861 was, that Congress, it ended sine die, and the new Congress came into office in July of 1861. And so the stories about what happened in 1861 regarding Congress are, I've got it fully explained. But she quite often she will always come up with some amazing proposition, cite some legal authority for it. But when you check out the legal authority she cites, it's dead wrong. Typically, what she's claiming, certainly the quotes she's making from that legal authority isn't there. But quite often, the legal authority she cites doesn't have anything to do with what she's talking about. But hey, we've got another hour and a half to go during the course of the program. We got a lot of ground to cover. You mentioned
yeah,
a
we're
minute
going to
ago.
extend it. Like I said, let's go for it.
Okay, well, did you want to talk about income tax?
Yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to really get into because you have an intriguing reputation in the halls of the IRS. So, you know, I mean, I know what you have filed. I know I've read a lot of stuff. I've got different stuff that required from people around that industry. And so, like I said, you got a positive but inquisitive reputation in that building.
Well, you know, I will tell you this. You know, I've got back in the early 2000s when I saw what we could do on the internet. You know, I said I want to make what I have done in reference to my studies available to the American people. Now, we'll cover that in a minute. Let's go back to the 16th Amendment. And, you know, this letter that you mentioned a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
I guess you're surprised maybe how I got that one, huh?
Well, I'm surprised it still circulates. But
no, I circulate it all over. It's on my website. I post it up all the time. I've been posting up since I got it a few years back.
Well, let me tell you about that. You know, what's your position on its authenticity?
Oh, I take it to credibility because I've never paid. I don't pay any of that system. Never have,
Okay,
won't do it.
Yeah, okay, you just put it up there and let people read it. Well, let me tell you the real story behind it. And this is what I have a problem with in reference to the freedom movement. There was a guy back in the mid-'80s by the name of Al Carter. Al Carter was, you know, kind of an opportunist.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing that he did. He went around to, you know, you can go into these antique bookshops and, you know, libraries and stuff like that, and you can buy these old bonds and old stock certificates of defunct corporations. You know, hey, let's say there's a railroad corporation created back in 1872, and it authorized the issuance of 5,000 shares of stock, and it sold that stock. Then it went out of business, and but those stock certificates were kind of pretty. So there's kind of an industry or a group of people that are interested in collecting those old stock certificates, but they're worthless. But Al Carter went around, making the claim. He bought up a whole bunch of those, went to these bookstores and antique shops and bought a bunch of old, I guess you can get them for $10 and $12. Why? Because you can frame them, I guess. People that are interested in antique stuff, you can frame them. Hey, there's a stock certificate. And there's fancy printing on it, and there might be a history behind the corporation, a railroad corporation. Hey, man, this corporation built a railroad from Chattanooga to Nashville. But, Al Carter got a lot of those, and then he invented this story that they were worth millions because, you could use these stock certificates to claim assets of current railroad companies. Well, a stock certificate issued in 1870, and let's say the corporation went bankrupt or went out of business in 1890, there's a statute of limitations on a stock certificate. Just represents a beneficial interest you have in the assets of the corporation. And let's say that you're a stockholder and something happens to a business. Stockholders can bring lawsuits against corporations. But there's a limit to the time period. There's a statute of limitations. Let's say that the statute of limitations is 10 years. Well, after the statute of limitations expires for asserting a stock claim against a corporation, the stock certificate is worthless. But Al Carter went around and made claims. Hey, we can get the assets of the current. Like this company owned the railroad from Nashville to Chattanooga. We can make millions and billions. and he was defrauding people with that claim. And he got Richard Mack. Richard Mack's a friend of mine. Richard Mack carried his case to the United States Supreme Court back in 1997. You know, it's a very important case. Prince and Mack against the United States dealing with gun rights. But, you know, Richard was hornswoggled by Al Carter to move his office up to Salt Lake. And, you know, at the time that I guess it was the State Boys were honing in on Al Carter's fraud, you know, they ended up searching Al Carter's office, including Richard Mack's office. And Richard kind of got pissed at all that. But that's who Al Carter is. Back in the early 80s, you know, when the news about the ratification of the 16th Amendment came out, you know, Al Carter was in the business. He was selling these. It was a health product. You know, it's these. Have you ever seen these little trampolines?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you know, they're about 2 feet wide. They're circles, and they're sold by the people that believe in them. You're supposed to bounce on them. You know, I've had clients and friends that have had these things. You know, they get up in the morning and bounce on their little bouncing machine. Oh, that's what Al Carter sold. But, you know, he was also interested in the tax issues. And when we got rolling on the 16th Amendment argument, you know, Al Carter typed up that fake letter. Now, you can write off to the IRS, get a letter from the IRS, and then you can superimpose on that, you know, something else. And there have been, you know, Phil Marsh did that. Take actual letters from the IRS and change them. And that's what Al Carter did. In the spring of 1985, Bill Benson and I were raising the 16th Amendment in certain criminal cases. We were also traveling the country telling people about the 16th. We wanted people to know. Bill had spent an entire year on the road checking out the ratification of the 16th Amendment. We can talk about it here in a minute. But, you know, because this was a news item, you know, it was of concern. You know, I'll tell you this, we raised this issue in a case out in California, and we had oral arguments about 1986 up in Seattle. And, you know, I went up there to argue that, and the place was packed. When we first argued it in the district court down in L.A., you know, when I went there to argue that motion to dismiss criminal charges because of non-ratification of the 16th Amendment, the line went out the courthouse. There were people standing in line to get into the courtroom. I met George Washington and I met Thomas Jefferson. There were guys that came there dressed as George Washington and as Thomas Jefferson. And they wanted to come in to see, you know, the arguments about the non-ratification of the 16th Amendment. And it was the same way when we argued the case on appeal in the Ninth Circuit up in Seattle. But, you know, getting back around to Al Carter, you know, all Al Carter did is he fabricated an IRS letter. He had a letter from the IRS. He stuck, you know, what he had to say about, oh, gee, make all these refunds. He typed that up and pasted that on the cover of a genuine IRS letter and started circulating it. And probably about a month after it first started circulating, you know, people, hey, look at this, sent it to both Bill and me. And, you know, I was somewhat skeptical. Well, wait, you know, why is the IRS doing all this? You know, the IRS wouldn't fold up tent like this. And then later on, before the end of the year, we had traced the source of that letter back to Al Carter. And I had a personal phone call with Al Carter, and he related to me what I've just told you, that, hey, all I did is I'm interested in trying to get people to look at this issue, so I made up this phony letter. And it still circulates today. Hey, that's the reason why I'm talking about, you know, there are things we got to do in this movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Phil Marsh would do that type of stuff.
Right.
Jeff Dixon and Phil Marsh got rolling back in, he had this exit the, tax program. Back in about 1991, he got rolling, and, hey, he made a whole lot of money, and he was traveling all over the country, and, 60 Minutes did segments on him, and, he was kind of like Len Meredith. But ultimately, he got raided, indicted, and convicted. But, Phil Marsh was doing that type of stuff. He had a program, for $1,500, you can exit the system. And, one of the sales things that they show to you are all these letters coming from the IRS. You could buy a franchise in Phil Marsh's Pilot Connection Society. Pay $10,000, I'll give you all this stuff. You can go out and conduct seminars, and, that was big money for Phil Marsh and the Pilot Connection Society. But Jeff Dixon were trying back in the late, I think it was about 1998 or 1999, we had a conspiracy case. Took 2 months to try up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And these people were clients of some guy that was a subsidiary of the Pilot Connection Society. And the government showed us in discovery. They raided Phil Marsh, and, we went into a room, we said, hey, we want to see the Phil Marsh stuff. So they got it from Colorado and brought it to Cincinnati. We sat down in a room, and they showed us some of the documents that they had seized from Phil Marsh that my clients had some questions about. And sure enough, you could sit there and see, they'd cut out, the government had these, in these notebooks, you could pull out a sample letter, but it had been cut out. You could see it's an original letter of the IRS, but, it had been carefully cut out with a knife or scissors or whatever, so that something could be superimposed on top of it. And that's exactly what the letter that we're talking about from Al Carter was. But see, these things detract from, the real issue. The real issue was the 16th Amendment ratified, and I think people need to know about that. Back in the early '80s, Red Beckman and Bill Benson had heard these rumors. Some people had written off and gotten some basic information about the ratification of the 16th Amendment. So in 1984, Bill ran into a guy by the name of George Sitka from Bristol, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
George was under the gun. So he said, hey, I'll subsidize, I'll pay for all this research we need to do. Well, Bill, will you do it? Bill said, yeah. So George Sitka paid for everything for Bill Benson to travel all over the country to visit all 48 states in the Union back in those days to check out the ratification of the 16th Amendment. Now, the Constitution, the Constitution authorizes Congress to impose two types of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1787, if you read the notes of the convention, the Continental Congress had no power of taxation.
Right, it was power of indirect or non-direct.
Yeah. So when they met in Philadelphia to authorize or grant taxing powers to the federal government, the states were living off of direct taxes, and they didn't want direct taxes to be used by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted the federal government to live off of indirect taxes, which are excises, duties, and imposts.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution says they got to be uniform throughout the country. But in reference to direct taxes, they're required to be apportioned,
right,
which is real difficult to do. Chances are, but we've used it only a few times. Back during the War of 1812, there were some acts, and during the Civil War, there were some acts. But it's real difficult to impose at the federal level a direct tax.
Mm-hmm.
So, in 1894, Congress came along and passed, an income tax. It was immediately challenged in the Pollock case.
and killed.
Yeah, and the Pollock case went to the United States Supreme Court in 1894, and the Supreme Court said, hey, the 1894 income tax is unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
The income tax is a direct tax, and since that one wasn't apportioned, it was unconstitutional. Well, to solve this problem in 1909, there was an amendment proposed to the United States Constitution, the 16th Amendment. Now, to explain something about the 16th Amendment, let's deal a little bit of its history. Senate Joint Resolution 39 in 1909 proposed that they actually amend the taxing provisions of the United States Constitution. But that was rejected. They didn't want to amend the taxing provisions. And so Senate Joint Resolution 40 came out. This is the one that Congress adopted. And it didn't say anything about amending the Constitution, amending anything inside the United States Constitution. It just says Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. And so, once the 16th Amendment was allegedly ratified, it became the basis for, supposedly, that...
Well, the 16th Amendment was never ratified. It was passed by the House.
Well, that's what we're getting ready to talk about. I'm going to talk about.
Okay, because I've got the other congressional record here in front of my face, so we'll go there.
But Bill Benson, when Bill Benson, I was giving you a little bit of the history to put Bill Benson's work into context.
Okay, I know where you're going, but I wanted to clarify that so it wasn't just confusion for some people.
Yeah. The 16th Amendment, clears up the thorny constitutional problem for an income tax at the federal level. So, it's important. Without it, the income tax would have to be apportioned, which is real difficult to do. So, in the early 80s, there were some people that had some basic information about the ratification of the 16th Amendment. Bill Benson and Red Beckman knew about it, and they approached George Sitka, and George Sitka said, "Hey, take off, I'll fund you." So that's what Bill did for a whole year, all of 1984. As the time would permit, he would go to these places and dig up, their historical records regarding, how a particular state acted upon the 16th Amendment. He also, in August of 1984, went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And that's where he dug up, a lot of important information regarding, the federal documents that related to the ratification of the 16th Amendment. And so he finished right before Christmas in 1984. In January 1985, we started laying out the issue. I filed a motion in the Janie Ferguson case, then pending for trial in January up at Indianapolis. But, Bill, the Constitution requires that 3/4 of the states have got to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. So
right. Let me throw something here real quick. Anyhow, folks, we'll be opening up for questions here in a little bit, but let them finish up, and then we'll wrap up here in a little bit, then we'll open up for questions. So go ahead.
The Constitution requires that 3/4 of the states ratify an amendment. What Bill did is he went, the Philander Knox in February 25th of 1913 proclaimed the 16th Amendment as having been ratified. He said that 38 states ratified it. It took 36 states back in those days when we had 48 states in the Union. It took 36 states to ratify it. What Bill discovered is that, if you sit down and you actually take a look at the documents as to whether or not the 16th Amendment was ratified, you can build an argument that it wasn't ratified. Now, Bill wrote a book called The Law That Never Was. There's Volume 1 and Volume 2. And he lays out exactly what happened in every state. And, there's a number of defects. For example, in Kentucky, the Kentucky Senate voted against the 16th Amendment, so it wasn't ratified when the government claims that Kentucky ratified the 16th Amendment. Here's what happened. So about a year after it was rejected in Kentucky, some state officials in Kentucky typed up some alleged notes about what happened with the 16th Amendment and sent it to Washington, D.C., and that's what Flander Knox used to say that Kentucky ratified the 16th Amendment. When the Senate had voted against it, 9 in favor, 22 opposed. As Bill used to say, when is 9 greater than 22? It is never greater than 22. So it was defeated in Kentucky, and yet Kentucky's claimed to be a state that ratified it. But so you have those types of defects, like Oklahoma. Oklahoma amended the 16th Amendment and said, well, while we're going to eliminate the apportionment requirement for income taxes, no, we're still going to require income taxes to be apportioned. Well, the 16th Amendment that Oklahoma allegedly ratified means the exact opposite of the 16th Amendment we have today. So these were the types of defects we were coming along, and what we were saying in these cases, we were raising these defects and saying, hey, because of these defective state ratifications, the constitutional threshold for the adoption of an amendment to the United States Constitution wasn't reached. And we sought a declaration that, 16th Amendment wasn't ratified. However, here's what the courts held. There's some cases, dealing with political questions. Courts can't do anything with a political question. They can only do something with a judicial question. And in some of these areas dealing with amendment ratifications, there's some authorities saying, well, it might be a political question. I maintain that it's not. And you can go over to my website and you can read all the authority. I've got the briefs, some real good that explain the 16th Amendment ratification issue, the briefs and the laws on this point. I maintain it's a judicial question. But the courts took the safe route. And they said, we're not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. It's a political question. So,
they didn't want liability, and that was the point that people don't comprehend. They are liable.
Well,
for their decisions.
Yeah. And you got to understand, the courts really do, particularly the federal courts. Boy, they do a lot of protecting of the federal government. And if you're going to try to deny power to the federal government, it isn't going to be taken. It isn't going to happen in a case where you just wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to do something," and you go marching off to court. The way you have to carry out these battles is like the Heller case. And I don't know whether, I know most people don't know anything about the Heller case, about how the D.C. against Heller, how that came about. Bringing the first real good challenge regarding the application and the meaning of the Second Amendment. Well, here's how it happened. Can I take a few minutes to explain?
Yeah, go ahead, because I even know what Rod Class did in Washington, D.C. on it.
Okay, but Dick Heller met Dane von Breckinbruckhardt back in the 90s when Dane was moving to Washington, D.C., and he was looking for a room to rent. He didn't want to live in an apartment. He wanted to live in a house. And so he was looking for places, houses that were renting space in the house. So Dane, I guess he saw, an ad in the local paper. Dick Heller's advertising a room for rent. And Dane, who is Dane? Dane is a professional sharpshooter, or was, died a couple of years ago. He's a professional sharpshooter. I mean, he's been on the, I forgot what armed services it was, maybe it's the Army or, but he was one of the marksmen. He's a professional marksman. So he's moving to Washington, D.C. He talks to Dick Heller, and, after they agree that Dick's going to let him rent a room upstairs, the second floor of Dick's house, they start unloading his car. And here this marksman, Dane von Breckinbruckhardt, is getting ready to, a marksman is in love with his guns. You will not even touch a bullet of a marksman. Oh, bullets are real. They will spend $10 and $20 for a professional to make one of their bullets that they're going to shoot.
Mhm.
And boy, you better not breathe on my gun. So here, Dane is unloading all of his girlfriends these guns, and Dick Heller is sitting there aghast. Whoa, Dane, you can't do this. This is Washington D.C. We got a gunman. You're gonna have to take those guns over there to Maryland or Virginia, and rent a place to hide them. And Dane was just aghast at all this. So for the next years, they planned how they were going to. The D.C. versus Heller case was completely planned from the very beginning. How they were going to create the facts to raise the issue. And they also went out and got other parties to become involved. Dane spent years talking to gun owners, NRA. Hey, we got to come together. We're going to do this right. And getting people that are, the experts on the Second Amendment that are going to come in and represent, this test case.
Right.
And it was a perfectly planned test case, all the way up to, a lot of people don't know this. The Supreme Court went looking for a guard. I guess they ran an ad in the local paper, Washington Post, Washington Times, anyway, the Supreme Court was looking for a guard. Hey, we need a guard. You got to come to work. You put on a uniform. You got a guard who protects us with a gun. And Dick Heller saw that ad, applied for that job, and got it. Talk about planning.
Mm-hmm.
This was planned. And even at the time that case goes to the United States Supreme Court, in the morning, Dick shows up at work, goes into, I guess they have some place in the basement. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Or the employee goes, or the uniform guards. They'll change into their uniforms, and they'll put on their gun. And they wear the gun around as they're protecting the building and protecting the Supreme Court justices. But after that, in the evening, I guess at 5 o'clock, they're going to go back into the locker room and change into their street clothes. They're going to leave their uniforms there in their locker and their gun. And Dick is going to walk home through the streets of Washington, D.C., can be a bad place, unarmed. And Dick was doing that. I don't know whether he did it on the day that his case was argued in the Supreme Court. I kind of doubt that. But, at the time, this case went to the Supreme Court, that's where Dick was working. And if you're talking about planning, the Heller versus D.C. case was completely planned. And one of the things we have to do to raise our issues that are important for us, we can no longer, do like what was done in the past. Like a good issue, wages are not income, was slaughtered because of people that were completely unprepared. They did no studying. They didn't know what they were doing. The only thing they know is they had read a book called Are You Required, which laid out a basic structure to the wages is not income argument. And then when they got into trouble, they threw some pleadings at the court. Hey, wages is not income. With
no evidence, no facts backing them.
Right, yeah. And that's what happened to the wages. A real good issue, got destroyed by people who were just desperate. And that's if we don't start planning, we're not going to get anywhere. There's political things that can be done in this country, and there's legal things that we can do in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But unless we plan, today patriotism is, I look around the movement, a lot of people have they have a philosophical interest in it. But the people that have a philosophical interest in it don't have a moral commitment to it. And that's the reason why we're not making real progress.
Well, and also too, people get into a project and then they don't realize it is more than what they anticipated. They just wanted to go put a John Henry on it and walk away and expect the miracles to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, people on our side, hey, they got to work for a living. They can't devote a lot of time to studying and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, but the other side, this is all they do.
That's what they get paid for to do.
It's a professional army against a part-time army. Part-time is the best characterization you can give to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more likely a ragtag army.
Yeah.
We've been on about an hour and a half. Did you want to take questions?
Yeah, we'll do questions here in a few minutes. I did want to bring up so people did know if they were not aware that I do love this point because, like I said, I do my research too as well. But the 16th Amendment was never ratified. The United States Constitution Congressional Record House, June 13, 1967, page 15,641 through 15,646. And then the Supreme Court decision in 1968 was Dwight versus Turner. That made it very clear it was never passed or ratified.
Well, no, that's in reference to the 14th Amendment. Diet against Turner relates to the 14th Amendment, and that 1967 document that you're relating to. And this is the reason what I'm talking about. You're looking at the actual sources.
Now, I got you on that one, but I got that sent to me from a senator. And that's what he was going by the reference. And I know about the 14th Amendment was passed for lawful and legal citizen. I've done the research on that and actually got the records from Congress on that.
But, the 1967 date relates to, an interest. Back in the 60s, people were concerned about even the ratification of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment's got real problems. The 16th Amendment has real problems. So does the 17th Amendment. When Bill Benson did his research through the states for a whole year, he not only did the 16th Amendment, he also did the 17th Amendment. But then again, the 14th Amendment also has substantial flaws. But the problem with, raising these issues in court over whether or not an amendment's been ratified, the courts are going to sit there and say, hey, that's not a judicial question, that's a political question. And so you take your political question to Congress, who will predict what the outcome's going to be.
Well, that's always amazing how they do that to walk away from it so they don't have to have liability.
Right.
And then people got to remember, these men and women are smart when they do this stuff because they know about rape, robbing, and pillage, and so that way they don't go to prison for violating their own oath. They know it.
Yeah. Well, are we going to take questions, or are we going to move on?
Yeah, we can open up the floor, take some questions, and then we get back into this. But we'll open up the floor. I know Dave really wants to say hi to you, so we'll let Dave go first. And so wait till the board's open.
Now,
I wouldn't mind also talking about nationals at some stage.
Okay.
Now, I will remind all the callers here that we are trying to be polite and courteous to everybody, so no running more than 5 or 10 minutes each, and no arguing, no yelling, no screaming. Stick to the facts, not your beliefs, and try to keep things in a very calm manner. Now we will open up the board.
All participants are unmuted.
Hi, Larry.
Hello.
This is
Dave.
Yeah, this is Dave Booth. It's been a while since you and I were together out at the hearing on taxation in D.C.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, this is what I'm talking about. Bob Schultz. Bob Schultz was going along real good for a while, but then the IRS came along and attacked. And my problem with Bob is it was basically a one-man show. It was all Bob Schultz. And
I got my big problem with the hearing on taxation was that was based on a redress of grievance filed with the Congress of the United States, which they denied the people. That's high treason against the Constitution. Why did he not proceed to file criminal charges against the Congress for high treason?
Well, here's the way Bob went about it. And it was in an organized, methodical fashion. The questions were framed And the meeting to decide the framing of the questions, there was a meeting in Vegas in August of 2001. And after we had that August meeting, we decided to meet in Milwaukee on September 10th of 2001. Bob Schultz showed up, Jeff Dickstein, Bob Bernhoff, myself, a couple of others. We're going to decide to write all these questions. We want about 300. So that's what our task was. September the 10th, Bob flew out to go to see Irwin Schiff in Vegas. And then the next day happened. Everybody knows what 9/11 was. But we got a rough start on framing the questions, but by December of 2001, we had the 300 questions done. And then in, I think it was early March of 2002, we had this confab in Washington, D.C. It was at the Daughters of the American Revolution. They have a good building there in D.C. that has the facilities for us. And so Bob paraded all these experts up there on the stand, and, we answered all these questions that the government wouldn't answer. Right. And so the inherent problem that's been in reference to the right to petition government, our position is the government's got to reply.
Most certainly.
We laid out the whole the foundation for this lawsuit that Schultz filed was laid out very carefully, and then Bob went to court. It seems like it was in the summer of 2004, after Bob had this march around Washington D.C. They marched to the U.S. District Court in Washington D.C. to file this lawsuit, and because of the government's refusal to answer our 300 questions, They always refused to even meet with us. At first, they promised Bob Schultz they'll meet and answer questions, and they won't. Well, the end result of what the government has said in reference to your right to petition the government for redress of grievances is, the current position of the government now is that, you can ask all you want, but we don't have to answer. And so there I don't like the way the courts have responded to this. But if that's their conclusion, that you can ask all you want, but the government doesn't have any obligation to answer your petition for redress of grievances, what are you going to do? And you're not going to get anywhere in a criminal case.
Well,
so
if they're assuming that the corporation is the government, not we the people. See, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
The corporation, the 28 U.S.C. 3002 definition 15, the United States means a federal corporation. And if you look at the Clearfield Doctrine, once a government becomes a corporation, it loses its government entity. There is no government because the United States is a corporation.
Well, but to get back to this constitutional provision, Dave was asking, why we don't go. I think that's the question that he was asking. Why don't we try to bring some criminal charges against them? Well,
well, do we actually have a court of law that we can go to?
Well, when you know what the courts are going to respond, and this is part of legal research. This is part of the overall battle. This is one of the things that goes on in the battle. Issues come up, and you want to bring about change, and just merely having a desire for change is, well, that's the first ingredient. You have to have that desire, interest, and motivation. But then the ability to achieve what you desire is the next step. And that requires you to take a look at the legal landscape. And, the legal landscape on this, Bob Schultz, was thinking that he was going to be able to push this all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to say, the government's got to answer these 300 questions. Well, the D.C. Circuit said, no, you don't have to do that, and then the Supreme Court didn't take it. So what is your next move?
Exactly. Well, he did win a case when he sued the IRS in 2000.
Well, that related to summonses. But hey, I'll tell you this. It's been a couple of weeks since I talked to Bob. He had a deadline of May the 11th. The IRS attacked Bob Schultz You know, they said he was an abusive tax shelter. And they sent him a notice of deficiency and all this other stuff. And Bob has been, you know, after Mike Bodine died, I think he died about 2012. You know, the ability for Schultz to be Mike Bodine was his right-hand man for, you know, his website and keeping the email list going, and, you know, so Bob had that problem. But basically for the last 10 years, Schultz has been, and the We the People Foundation have been battling the attack by the IRS, with the IRS contending that, you know, he's an abusive tax shelter. That's the reason why they can come along and make these attacks against people. That's where Schultz went.
Well, my question relating to the decision of the First Circuit Court of Appeal was that it plainly states that no action can be taken against a supposed taxpayer without first taking them to court. And what the IRS does, they're hiding as not disclosing themselves as a collection agency, which is a violation of Title V. So therefore, they ignore the law and put out fraudulent debt instruments claiming you owe a tax.
Yeah.
When you and I both know, based on hearings in the House and Senate, that all the taxes are voluntary.
Well, Dave, there's a lot of arguments that can be raised regarding the misapplication of the federal income tax. You know, I got a long list of them. The question becomes, you know, we've got two ways we can bring about change, you know, for over these issues. There's the political. Well, it's three ways. We can pursue things in court judicially. We can become active politically. But I've looked around. How long have both of us have been involved with the tax movement for decades?
Oh, yeah.
So try to get the average member of the tax movement to lift a finger to write a letter to Congress.
I've written 10,000 letters to Congress.
And how many others have?
I don't know, but I've only had 25 responses to 10,000 letters.
Yeah, okay. Well, now you talk. The point I'm simply making is most of the people in the tax movement, well, they're busy with their own lives, but they're not willing to devote a lot more time to it for us to do something positive in reference to the misapplication of the federal income tax. So I rule out, you know, to anything happening politically. So that leaves the only way that we can bring about positive change is judicially or by armed revolution.
Right. Well, you see, the problem that I have with the IRS is that currently, in violation of due process, which is a civil rights matter, okay?
Yeah.
They never took me to court. That's a violation of the decision that they made in 2005 in Schultz versus IRS.
Yeah.
No action can be taken without first taking them to court.
Yeah.
I've never been criminally charged with tax evasion, failure to pay, all that stuff. Okay? The IRS also in violation of the Paperwork Reduction Act, 44 U.S.C. at 302, okay?
Yeah.
And at 3512, they have to inform the supposed tax.
Hey, Dave, can I offer you? You mentioned the Paperwork Reduction Act. Can I also mention the alternative possibility?
Sure.
That the IRS really is in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act, and boy,
not when they're doing it. Yeah.
Hey.
They were that U.S. versus Lawrence in Peoria, Illinois. He won his case because the IRS never informed him of the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Yeah.
That he did not have to fill out their forms. He won that case.
The IRS is doing things in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act, and that has a direct relationship to where this tax operates. And you know that's the subject of a different discussion. But, you know, the Paperwork Reduction Act is real important for assisting people in determining how this tax operates. That's all.
I'd have to agree with you on that.
Yeah. Oh, well, it sounds like what you're complaining about is that the IRS came along and issued you a notice of deficiency. You didn't go to tax court, and now they claim you owe a bunch of taxes.
No, they never even did that.
Oh.
They sent me a letter. I responded to it, and they never responded to my response.
So how much do they claim that you owe?
A little over $10,000.
Oh, okay. Well, you know,
the problem is the case that wage for labor is an exchange, income is generated, is that I got from the hearing on taxation in D.C.
Yeah. Yeah, that was.
So there is an actual court case on that, and I put those rulings of the court up on Facebook and Tax Fraud in America. That's my webpage. And none of those cases appear in the IRS code or U.S. code, which is deliberate fraud. The deliberate withholding of information to cause one to act to his detriment is the definition of fraud.
Yeah.
Excuse me a minute. Hey, Dave, send them 10,000 coffee beans in a coffee bean case.
Yeah.
I said that to you.
Say that.
You know about the coffee bean case, don't you, Larry?
No, I don't. Tell me about it.
Oh, I'll send it to you. You know why Montgomery Ward's went bankrupt? Because the guy went in and proved, and the judge had to admit the dollar bill had the same value as one coffee bean.
I haven't heard that one.
I'd like to see that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll send it to you right now. Oh yeah, I've been pumping this one out because. Because I'm fighting them on property taxes. I've asked them to prove the debt. I've asked them to do so many things, and I'm not getting a response from anybody. So I got to call the state attorney general and the tax department for the state tomorrow. But I know they actually have a form that I've been informed. They actually do have a form to exempt yourself from property tax. They actually have a form in the tax office themselves. So. Go ahead.
The Credit River decision was a good case, too, when it comes to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
The only problem is after the judge made his ruling, they murdered him.
Yeah, Jerome Bailey.
People need to read that case out of Michigan, the Credit River decision. Or was it Wisconsin? Wisconsin or Michigan? I forgot.
I think it's Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
But anyway, that guy did a good job on that case.
Yeah.
So, what is lawful currency?
Really important. Well, if you want my position, Dave, go over to my website. On the front page of my website, the Dixieland Law Journal, there's a topic of money and economics. If you go over to that page, I've got this brief that outlines the legal history of money cases in this country, and that's very educational. And here's
my question that I put to the IRS was this: okay, you tell me I owe taxes, but I've never been paid. Because what is a Federal Reserve note? A Federal Reserve note is a debt instrument, is it not? So when's the due date on the note?
Yeah. Well, hey.
So if I've never been paid, how can I owe taxes?
Can I offer an alternative argument here?
Sure.
Okay. The legal tender power of Congress. The history behind all that. It starts during the Civil War. When Congress comes along and says, oh, well, these notes we've been issuing, we hereby declare them to be legal tender. And they authorize $300 million to be issued. Well, at the same time, that you have the war for the North being financed with green pieces of paper, the South was doing the same thing. My position is that, the governments, when they need war, to engage in war, they get all the resources by issuing paper. They are stealing the resources of the people away from them by these green pieces of paper and transferring all that wealth for the conduct of the war to the federal government. Well,
Yeah,
the
but
South
now-
was, the South was doing the same thing. Now
Right,
the Confederate note said it would be payable when the war was over. A treaty of peace had been signed between the Confederate States and the United States of America. That was the conditional promise that was
Right,
made
but they
on the,
said when the war was over, but they never said when they were going to pay after it was over.
Okay, but hey, listen. This is the Supreme Court I'm telling you about. This
Right,
is
no, I got you, but I'm just
okay,
go ahead.
Yeah, Thornton against Smith, which you can read. I've got it quoted on my web page, but you can read the whole case by going over and reading this brief. So the issue in Thornton against Smith, and this case has never been reversed. It goes up to the Supreme Court. It involves the question of it's decided after the Civil War. You know, of course, by then everybody knows Confederate currency is worthless. And so the issue is, well, you know, gee, how much has to be paid? Here you have a contract that's made during the war, and now that the war is over with, what kind of currency you got to use to pay off this contract? And so the Supreme Court takes this case involving Confederate currency and decides the question. And what the Supreme Court says in reaching its decision is real important. And it notes that, you know, it says, well, the Confederate note had a conditional promise to pay. And the Supreme Court said a conditional promise to pay is invalid. It makes the currency worthless. Well, let's compare the Federal Reserve note with Confederate currency. It has no promise to pay. It didn't even have a conditional promise to pay. So my response is, if you compare a Federal Reserve note along the decision in Thornton against Smith, a Federal Reserve note is worse than Confederate currency. But then, since I'm from the South,
hang on a minute, guys. Let's see if anybody else would like to chime in and throw something in here. Let's give somebody else a chance here real quick, because we've been going on here for a little bit, and let's give somebody else a chance if they want to speak, and if not, you two jump back and forth. So anyhow, anybody else would like to speak at this point? The floor is open. I know there's people there.
Man.
Okay.
Ed?
Go ahead.
I'd like you to get me in touch with this lawyer, please.
Okay.
Give me a discussion on some of my research.
Okay. So do you have any, would you like to add anything into it, Southern?
Not at this time. I would. Yeah, I would. You need to go into your state laws and find out. Wait a minute. Let me find it here. Let me find it. Okay, let me find it. Hold on.
Oh, come on. You weren't prepared?
This document is 32 pages. Give me a break.
I'm not going to comment to that one. I've been through there before myself, where I always hate it when it's sitting in front of your face and you can't sit there and you can't authorize it with your own eyes.
Okay, you need to go into your state laws and look up definition of currency and definition of payment instrument.
Yeah.
I'll read that.
Just say it. We're not looking it up. Just tell everybody else what it means.
Well, here's a definition of payment instrument. Florida statute 560.13, definition 29. Payment instrument means a check, draft, warrant, money order, traveler's check, electronic instrument, or other instrument payment of money or monetary value, whether or not negotiable. Now, there's a problem right there. Yeah, I did say warrant. Now, there's a problem right there. Gold and silver ain't on there. Now, wait a minute. Here's the good part. Here's the good part. This term does not include an instrument that is redeemable by the issuer in merchandise or service. So it just did away with everything that you can possibly pay a debt with.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So ask them, you might want to ask the IRS what they want you to pay with.
Yeah.
We've done that.
You got
And
to
we're
be
still waiting for them.
Can
You
you
gotta be
restate
careful.
All right, one at a time. Let the lady jump in, and then we'll come back to the gentleman. Go ahead,
Okay.
ma'am.
Can you restate the title on that you just mentioned?
That's Florida statute 560.103, definition 29.
Thank you.
That
But you also got to remember that Florida laws, are only applicable in Florida.
Well, hold on a second. Friend of mine, I run a group, and we check this out in just about every state. Now, there's some states out there, and a friend of mine a few years ago went down with a gold bar to the courthouse to pay off a traffic fine. They arrested him. Even though in his state, it states you can pay in gold and silver, they arrested him for it.
Wow.
You cannot pay in gold and silver now. Okay? You can't do it. There is let me find it. Like I said, it's a big document. It's my money doc. I got like 20 sides, about 30 pages. Hold on. No, that's not it. Trust,
Okay. Well, he's picking that up.
Are you telling me
Go ahead.
that you pay with
gold and
gold or silver coins?
Huh?
I can't see why a debtor would want to pay in gold and silver coin.
Because he wanted to prove that I was wrong, that he could do it. He spent 18 days in jail.
That goes back to the Credit River decision.
Hold on 1 second.
Well, he was just saying that the guy was thrown in jail because he was trying to pay it in gold and silver.
Okay.
That's why he was arrested.
But I'm saying that's.
It goes back to HCR 192. What they did with HCR 192, they created a new form of legal tender on the Federal Reserve notes. Okay? And made paying of your debt.
Let's not concede too much power. There's a tendency for people to concede power to the government, unrightfully so.
Well, I think
HCR 192 is no longer in effect. It hadn't been in effect since 1977. And if you go read my brief posted over on my website, I explain all this. Plus, I link to cases where the issue of payment in gold and silver coin has come up, and the courts have forced the payment of gold and silver in contract situations. But you need to read those cases. This is what I'm talking about listening to the Patriot movement and the rumors that float around, and then accepting the rumors at face value.
So let me ask a question then.
Now we go back to the Clearfield Doctrine and the corporation. The government gave up their government entity when they became a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask a question then.
Let the guy finish. Oh.
Let me ask a question. Since HCR 192 is no longer in effect, then Federal Reserve notes are not payment for anything.
Well,
we got a real problem here in this country. The monetary systems
were created.
One at a time, please. Go ahead, Larry, first, and then Dave.
Go ahead.
I see the financial power that's been built up in this country. They're the beneficiaries of laws that have favored them. And now they've got it to the point where, hey, we're getting ready to have nothing as money.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to want just an electronic digit in some computer somewhere to be our money. When that happens, these people will be in they have they'll have a lot more control over society than their society that is controlled with just paper. So we're getting ready to be totally controlled. We're going to become communists. The Chinese are marching ahead of us. Electronic currency is going to be the death knell for any society that adopts it. And if we're going to, the free man's money is gold and silver coin. And if the people that are interested in this issue don't get organized so that we can achieve this goal, and this is a big, monumental fight. It's the biggest fight any society could fight, to bring down the monetary manipulators that exist inside their country receiving legislative benefits. So how do we tear apart this monster? It's a lot of work.
Let me throw one other thing out there and I'll shut up. This is from IRS manual. All right. 21.1.7.9.17. 10/1/2015. Unacceptable payments. There is no definition of payments in the manual. Unacceptable payments. Gold, silver, jewelry, stamps, saving bonds, treasury notes, treasury bills, stocks, treasury certificates of deposit, promissory notes, credit cards, debt cards, gift cards, gold coin other than United States currency, all right, deposit slips or withdrawal slips. And that was pulled right out of the IRS manual.
Well, isn't that interesting?
He's correct. The sir that just spoke and read that, he is 100% correct.
So, all right. So,
now,
Larry, what's your comment back to that one?
The question I have, they just stated that a note is not legal currency.
Yeah.
That's right.
So if the note is not legal currency, the Federal Reserve note is not legal payment.
That's correct.
And there's a lot of defects against the Federal Reserve note. Hey, Confederate currency is better than the Federal Reserve note.
The Federal Reserve note, and you go back to the Revolutionary War, and then back then, United States dollar was backed by a silver certificate.
Well, actually, it was that or silver itself.
Exactly. So the U.S. currency, as we knew it back in the day, okay, was backed. You could go to the Treasury, hand them $1, and they'd give you however much silver.
371 grains of pure silver. That's what a silver dollar is. That's the constitutional currency.
Right.
That's right.
What we have is the natural evolution of fractional reserve banking. First, fractional reserve banks led to banks that had gold and silver in reserve, and they were issuing bank notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the National Banking Act of 1863, they authorized national bank notes to circulate. But then they came along and they made some changes. There were all these bank notes being issued by private state banks. So what they did is to address that issue is they passed a tax on bank notes, state-issued bank notes, 10%. Well, that was enough to kill the circulation of bank notes by private banks. And so after that, all you had was the greenback issued by Uncle Sam and national bank notes. Then we get the Federal Reserve. There's an evolutionary history behind it. In order to understand the problems that we have today, you got to know some history about how we got here. And a good way to learn that.
I have some. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I have some information here that I think you guys would be interested in hearing. I did my research also, and the note that you're referring to, there are two different notes. There's the promissory note, and then there's the note. Your dollar bill, when you look at a dollar bill, it says note on it. That is the note that the banks are referring to as to the currency. The currency is backed up by the true bill, the dollar bill, or by silver and gold. That's why the word note is on the bill, and it says Federal Reserve Notes on that bill because of federal law. I want to bring something to your attention that you haven't touched on.
Okay.
Because you're all in the right direction as to what you're talking about. There's just a little bit of confusion going on here. I'm going to explain something to you about the bank regarding the endorsements as to the instrument, because what the gentleman was just talking about under Public Law 10, Chapter 48, 48 State 112.
48 Stat.
Or Stat, excuse me. And Public Law 73-10, 40 Stat 411. Keep in mind, because you all are touching on valuable points here, so I'm going to try to define what all of you have been talking about. The liquidation. Okay, liquidation is important because that has to do with stocks and bonds and etc. As to the corporation side, remember, as to the term civil, or civil as a civil person, citizenship, that has to do with the corporate side. As citizens,
that has to do with the Vatican British administrative rules.
Well, I'm not talking about that part.
Technically, that's what it comes down to, so I'm just stating.
Right. Well, there's two different terms under citizenship, but anyway.
Yes, there is.
Amounts received, the amounts received by a shareholder in a distribution is completed in a liquidation of a corporation shall be treated as in full payment in exchange for the stock. Now, somebody was mentioned about stocks and bonds. That's where that comes in. That's why a lot of people were up in arms when the president, meaning President Trump, was touching on stocks and bonds because the corporation has shareholders in stocks. So that's why they were saying, oh, crap, because if they're not doing it properly, then they would be committing fraud. It also means full payment in exchange for stocks. That's under liquidation. You can look up section 1.147-6, and that provides rules coordinating withholding under section 1471 and 1472, withholding provisions under other sections of the code, which is section 1.1474-7, provides the confidentiality requirement for information obtained to comply with the requirements of Chapter 4.
What code are you reading from?
This is the codes in. Those codes I'm reading to you apply to all 50 states. In other words, they're not codes specified under. It would be under UCC codes or the codes pertaining to the banks. International Revenue Code is of Section 1. So it's the International Revenue Code of Section 1471-1 through 1.1474-7, and this provides the rules for withholding when a withholding agent makes a payment to an FFI or an FFE, and prescribes the requirements for the definition relevant to the FFI and the FFE. I don't know what the FFE. You'd have to look these up. To which holding.
What's the document that you're reading from?
That's my document. It's the document pertaining to the Internal Revenue Codes. I'm reading you the sections of the codes of the Internal Revenue Codes.
Just from your court. Well, you mentioned this in International Revenue Code. Then it sounds like some of the section numbers you're reading out might be UCC.
Right. In other words, there are other elements. There are other elements that you have to look up that has to do with what we're talking about. In other words, what you've been talking about regarding the IRS. Keep in mind the share as to the taxes. It also falls back to the treaties. There's two sets of taxes. So this goes back to the treaties, back in history, okay? So I'm talking about the codes that applies to the banks and also the Internal Revenue codes of those sections. Now, and I don't know if anybody knows this, but that's why banks are trustees, and trustees cannot sue you, okay? They're just the holder of the note, okay?
Okay.
And no banks can do transfers to other banks without your personal consent. They have to have your consent. Your checks are also an instrument, which is also a note, and they also they're also under CDs. In other words, the banks use a CD deposit, right? It's the same thing as your checks, your personal checks that you write out to the bank to make a payment. The IRS naturally is committing fraud upon the people, because what they've done is what they did is they made us the debtors and them the creditors. But in reality, under the law and under the Constitution, because in 1933 America went bankrupt, and that's where that other gentleman is coming in under the HJR 192.
Let's clarify. The corporation went bankrupt. America, we the people, never went bankrupt. The British government went bankrupt to we the people.
The United States went bankrupt, and when that happened, the president signed a treaty.
Incorporation.
And as the corporation signed a treaty, and the people were not held accountable for that debt, because we didn't make the debt, they did. So under the HJR 192, and by the way, it does have standing, it is in effect, but you have to know what you're doing in order for that to work.
You have to remember that HJR 192, when it became public law, HJR, a House Joint Resolution, pertains to them, but when it becomes public law, that comes out to us.
Well, you have to know how to apply it.
You need to understand, though, too, and I provide the links to the documents on my brief on my website. In 1997, HJR 192 was no longer in effect, and that has to place a role into thinking, huh?
Who stated that it was no longer in effect?
It was in an act of Congress. Go over on my website.
Well, there you go. It was an act of Congress. So that could have been that tells me that Congress, that's where Congress is addressing con-cons under secrecy, and they're changing laws under secrecy. Because we were not.
HJR 192 came into effect. That was an act of Congress.
Well,
and it was in effect.
Well, it might have been.
It was.
That doesn't make it lawful.
Well, I know. It leaves it up to us to challenge it.
Well,
but but arguments built on HJR 192, and I've seen it for years. People making an argument about HJR 192. The people that are making those arguments need to take into consideration the fact that HJR 192 is no longer in effect. That's an act of Congress, and you can see that act of Congress because I've got it linked. I got it posted over on my website in that money issue brief that I'm talking about.
That's amazing. That is amazing, because I'd like to see that, because I'd like to go back into the laws and check it out, because just because Congress enacted it doesn't make it lawful.
Well, no, but
let me ask you a question.
You have an act of Congress, which is HJR 192, and then there's another act of Congress 44 years later, saying it's no longer in effect. So,
well, you were using that. You're grandfathered in on that change.
Well, I would look up this and write it down. It's section 1303. Dave, take yourself off speaker.
Okay.
Look up section 1303.40, and that's under the UCC 3-311.
Article 3 deals with negotiable instruments in the UCC.
That is correct. That is correct. So under those laws, they are still in effect. And you were reading something earlier about 95A pertaining to the president. as addressing that you were reading it, your document.
Yeah.
Now that is correct. That also applies under what we're talking about too, just so you know, because I've done my research. So under section 1303.40 regarding the discharge, keep in mind you're talking about A and B and C and etc.
Yeah.
And it under the law now, it illustrates by step what all that means pertaining to the instrument.
Yeah.
And that is where the banks and Congress are committing fraud upon the people, because they're not dealing with lawful money, they're only dealing with paper money. But where they're dealing with lawful money is from us. So and I'll give you an example. Let's talk about the mortgages, because there's a lot of fraud on that.
Oh, you're dealing
with
credit there.
Well, the one thing I like to add real quick, don't forget Executive Order 2040 made the birth certificates and insurance fund.
Right. So under the accord and satisfaction of mortgages by an instrument, because remember, an instrument is your check, or unless you're talking about the promissory note, which is your that a promissory note cannot be defined as what you were reading, and the other gentleman was just talking about. Okay, that's where he's coming from. They can't use a promissory note as money, but now that's exactly what they're doing on the fraud pertaining to the fraudulent foreclosures. They're using the promissory note, and they're forcing the promissory note in court when they're not supposed to be doing that at all. And just so you know, that's why an instrument, which is your check, has to be consent. It has to have an endorsement. Now, to give you an easy way about the fraud pertaining to the banks, the foreclosures. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Under 95-4/61, that's a validation of the penal code under Title 7 of Chapter 31, which would be theft. Now, some of these laws, you can't find them. They're very hard to find, and I happen to find that because Ed Johnson gave me an old document pertaining to laws that were done up years ago, and I printed it out, and some of these codes were in there, and it defines about some of this stuff that they don't want you to know about. But what they're doing, so you understand, a bank cannot do a transfer. It's just like when you go to the bank and you deposit your money in the bank, you have to have, the bank endorses it. In other words, the bank is endorsing your acknowledgement on the back of your check. In order for a loan to be lawful, that loan, by the person who's claiming that's giving you that loan, right, when you bought your house, had to be endorsed. And the only way it's lawful is that lender has to deposit the money into your bank account as to the transfer. Remember I was talking about the transfers pertaining to the CDs? It's the same scenario. They have to get your consent. The bank has to get your consent, and you have to have the signature of that person who's giving you the money, and then you sign it. So you're like the counter signature, or the counter signature's name is on the back of that check. Guess what? That's where the banks are committing fraud upon these fraudulent foreclosures, because they didn't give us true money. What they gave us was paper money. They claim they gave us money, right? But what they gave you was a promissory note, and that's it. Now, what they didn't tell
credit to you, that's all they did. The whole system
that
operates
is correct,
on
and that's right. That's on the promissory note. But here's where the fraud came in. After you signed your name and you went to the title company and you sat down with the attorney, or you didn't sit down with the attorney and you filled out all those papers, which was the promissory note. But what they didn't reveal to you, and now these are lawyers, what they didn't reveal to you is the bank was going to pay off the mortgage in full. So what they did is now that's what's called a securitization. So the bank securitized your mortgage from day one. You were giving them lawful money because you were writing out a check. And that was lawful money coming out of your checking account, right?
Yeah.
But the banks never gave you money. They only gave you a promissory note, and they claim that they gave you that money, but yet they're suing people and claiming that you owe them the money. That's why. And
these are all common questions that arise because we're operating off of a credit system. The way a bank,
that's another scam.
If you approach a bank for a loan on a house, you can take the balance sheet of the bank the day before the loan, the day of the loan, and the day after the loan, and you can show that all they do is they increase their deposits, their liabilities. And they just give you, when you go, if a bank, a commercial bank is going to be the mortgage holder, when you go to that loan closing, they're just going to put more numbers in your checking account.
Well, that's true, but now what people don't know, and maybe I don't know if you know this or not, but anybody that files a lien, the lien has to be approved by a
state
treasury. The state treasury of your state has to approve that lien. If the state treasury didn't approve that lien, guess what? They just filed a fraudulent claim upon you.
Well, one of the things they do is as part of the contract for making the loan to you, the contract requires you to give a mortgage. Mortgages are valid instruments. The flaw in the whole system is the money that we use is money today, which is nothing but credit. And
go ahead.
Well,
let me throw something in here.
Deeds, notes, and mortgages are all involved in a commercial loan to buy a house. All of those are valid instruments. You don't need somebody from the state to quote approve a mortgage. You have the constitutional right to contract, and a contract that you make is the mortgage that you give to a bank when they quote put additional numbers into your banking account, and then you spend those numbers. But then the problem comes about, when the whole industry as a whole decides to contract the outstanding amount of money in circulation, and that contraction prevents people from making a payment, and that now enables them to foreclose and get real property. And they harvest real property by merely extending credit, and that's the problem.
Sounds to me like money laundering.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you have to. That's why those that are on the call and especially those that are interested about the IRS, where the fraud comes in, etc. You have to know where you stand under these laws pertaining to the instrument. And I advise that everybody look it up under Section 1303.40 of the USCC 3-311, and under Section 3-417, which is the obligation of endorser, and Section 3-417 is presentment of warranties. So you have to know these, because this is very crucial as to what you were talking about on the call.
Yeah.
And it also gives you answers to what you were questioning about pertaining to the fraud and what we're not really. In other words, how are they going about this? Because remember, it all comes down to, no matter what, it comes down to the signature, the endorsement. Okay?
Yeah.
So a lot of what they're doing, in other words, they're not giving you the whole truth. They're only giving you what they want you to know, because let's face it, they don't want, if they gave us the whole truth, okay, then we would know how to go about it, and we would be able to stop this fraud. Well, they don't want us to know. Now, I know because I've looked it up.
Yeah.
But that's where the problem is. And the IRS goes under, and excuse me.
The banks cannot own property. If anybody reads the structure, the banks cannot own property at all. That's through the Banking Act itself and administrative rules of the banks themselves.
That's correct.
So, but anyhow, we're going to start wrapping this show up. Larry, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to bring out your points of your sites and that stuff for people. We're going to be wrapping this up in about 3 minutes. So go ahead, Larry, bring up your stuff so people have an idea how to research your.
All participants are muted.
So, all right, got it. Now, Larry, you still there? Where's Larry?
I got unmute me.
Yeah, hang on a minute. We're going to be off here in 2 minutes. I want Larry to bring out his information in his site.
Larry Larry, you are unmuted. We're hearing you say unmute.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we got it. Larry, it's your shot. Give out your information.
I've got a lot of educational materials posted over on my website. You got the entire United States statutes at large. You got links to all the United States state codes. You got links to all of the old tax acts. You got links to all of the tax regulations. A point I wanted to make during the course of this program is, going back, and just like the lady that was talking about the loans a minute ago, she cites cases. I find too often people will listen to rumor and hearsay and act according to rumor and hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
I strongly encourage you people. No, a lot of the times people will cite something to me, like fake Judge Anna, and when I go check it out, she fabricates a quote. And there is too much of fabricated information floating around, especially when we can, rather than relying upon the word of somebody else, go check it out. There's plenty of legal material available just off your computer, over the internet. And I just strongly encourage everybody to, start actually looking at and confirming the rumors that float around the movement, whether they're accurate or not. I see too many people basically acting upon inaccurate information. In order for America to be changed to the country that we want it to be, it's going to require a lot of work on our part. And when we try to change America back to what we want it to be, it's going to take a lot of work. But distortions and lies will not play any role in our achievement of the goal of restoring America to the place it needs to be. That's all I have to say, Ed. This has been a great program. You got a lot of people that are interested in listening to you. If you want me back on, just give me a call.
Oh, I will do that. We'll have you back on here in probably a week or two. Because next weekend I want to get into new births and how the hospitals are working and stuff like that so people can comprehend. Yeah. Don't forget to read Executive Order 2040 of the Bankruptcy Act when they put U.S. collateral for the British government. And that is the one thing that we've got to realize: who's running what, who's doing what in our public employee structure. Remember,
I'm enjoying it. Good enough. Bye.
I didn't hear you.
He was saying he's got to get going, so he said goodbye.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know he had a plan tonight. Anyhow, we'd like to end this conversation tonight. We thank Larry B. Kraft for joining us and bringing further points of views to our table and other structure. We'll have him back on. Like I said, he's been personally involved in a lot of this structure, so he does know what he's talking about because he's been in court on these issues. And so these are things that we can learn from. We've had a wonderful conversation bringing up things to the general public, and this is the whole point about proper education. And without proper education, we all end up, getting caught up in this stuff. And we'll look it up. And also, too, I'll send Larry, because House Resolution 192 was certified by Congress. And that was certified. I will tell you the year it was certified, so that way this was certified by Congress. This is a note for financials from the Congress, and I'm waiting for this thing to pop up here so I give you the actual date. As soon as the computer would work, instead of playing the computer game with me like it's doing again. But this is the whole point, and I will make sure that Larry gets a copy of this 192 certification too, because this is the point that is bringing forward to the evidence so we know what the banks can and cannot do. I'm dealing with an issue with the banks right now. It's been very frustrating for me, because, they put money in people's accounts that they owe, then they take it out, then they screw you up. These people do it deliberately to keep their profits going, their alignments going. And there was a term of what they call writ-off that they use in that structure. And it is very frustrating that we deal with this stuff the way it goes. And by this ratification, and I'll make sure anybody got it, it's on new.org and trackers. It's the certified copy of H.R. 192, Public Law 10CH 48 Stat 48112-1 .pdf. It is out there. It is circulating. 192 was ratified by Congress and certified May 2nd, 2002. And that was done by Gregory T. Cooper, and he was the Diplomatic Service Section Head of Office of Business and Enterprise for the Library of Congress. So we do have further information on this stuff to bring it out, and we'll make sure that people do get this for their records. Anyhow, with that, I would like to say, may the Great Spirit bless you. May Mother Earth provide for you as what Mother Earth does for us, and may the Great Spirit be with you and the Creator bless you. And may you all have a blissful evening.
Thank you, Ed. You've been listening to Disclaimers by Ed Johnston with a very special guest. It is May 19th, 2018. It is a Saturday. It is 8:03 Pacific Standard Time. And we all hope you found this show informative. Remember, as it was shown on many times on the YouTube channel, we are not lawyers, we are not attorneys, and we are not professionals in any way. We are just living men and women who have researched information and are bringing the information out to you. And any callers that call into this take liability for their own words and actions. We do not take liability for any actions other than our own. Thank you very much, and have a very good day.